Hey, what's going on everyone? Mekkah here and welcome to the biggest Fire Emblem tier list ever made. We are in the progress of tiering every single Fire Emblem character on this huge tier list. Let me just show you guys how much we've already done and how weird it looks to see all these characters together. In case you don't know how it works, I'm gonna put every character on here eventually, but in order to decide in what order I'm doing it, I'm having my Patreons suggest the characters to me. Every once in a while I post a thread on there. People get to submit 1 or 2 characters depending on our tier, and then I tier them, and then people get mad in the comments. Or actually, things have been very civil. I do read pretty much every comment. I try to take it into account. As the tier list gets bigger, it's being harder and harder to properly implement all the changes that are suggested, but I do try to look back on things eventually. My plan is actually, like, once this thing is complete, or maybe at like certain intervals, I plan to go over it with a couple people. See if there's anything like really out of place. I don't have the best perspective on every single character out there, so it is nice to every once in a while have someone else's perspective on it. But for example, people like Don and Pala Emblem have been commenting every once in a while about certain characters being too high or low, and usually they raise some good points, and I'm more than willing to listen to anyone, by the way, not just people that are like LTCers or whatever. Pretty much anyone can make good suggestions, I think. So, yeah, I say we just get into it because we got a lot of work. I have about 30 characters for you today. I've got characters from between FE1 to FE7. Speaking of FE1, there is a bit of a difficulty there. FE2 as well. So the tier lists tool that I'm using, FEtierlistmaker.github, it doesn't allow you to use FE1 or FE2 portraits because it just doesn't have them. It only really has FE3 onwards. So unfortunately, that means that I cannot represent characters from FE1 or FE2 in any way, other than by using characters from later games. And that's a bit of a problem that I only just realized after submissions have been done. So for example, Inazuma Frost has submitted Marth from FE1, and Boots42 has submitted Almond Celica from FE2. And I can't really put those anywhere because I don't have any extra portraits to represent them. So what I did is I put FE3 Marth here as an excuse to talk about him instead. I'll talk about FE1 Marth as well because that was the request, but I can't properly represent FE1 Marth on the tier list. As for Almond Celica, Alm was already put on here a while ago, his Shadows of Valencia equivalent, and Celica, I mean, I could put her on here, but I'll just talk about them real quick. But let's get to Marth first. So Marth in FE1 is kind of a really good unit, which is strange to think about, but he was like the first unit ever when you think about it, so I guess it makes sense that Kaga made him good. The most notable trait that I think is most interesting about FE1 Marth is that every enemy wants to attack him, even if they can kill someone else. Like, let's say Lena is in range of an enemy and she could just like straight up die, but they're like, nope, we're going for Marth, because I think they wanted the game over condition for Marth to be a big hurdle for the player. I think they wanted the enemy to just go for game overs at all possible times, even if it cost like a potential kill. I think the idea is like, okay, the player is not going to reset for every death, so we're just going to go after Marth instead. And that worked. There's like a couple more things that make Marth, I think, really good for efficient play in FE1. One of them is that if you're going to like warp skip a lot of chapters, if you're trying to beat this game as fast as possible, whether you're doing it in a speedrun session where you're trying to limit real time, or a low turn count fashion, Marth is your best unit for clearing chapters quickly because you only need to spend 1 warp to get into the boss. Because if you make him your boss killer, and well, let me just rewind a little bit. Marth needs to seize the throne in every single chapter other than the last one. So no matter what, you have to warp Marth. Now, if you have to warp a boss killer in addition to Marth, you have to spend 2 warps per chapter. And you get a lot of warps, but you don't get infinite ones in it, even in FE1. Yeah, you have about the same amount as you have in Shadow Dragon for people who have played that game, but not FE1. So you want to spend minimal warps when you can. And that's where Marth comes in. FE3 Marth is different because in that game the enemies don't always go for Marth anymore, and the game is structured a little differently. There's some chapters left out and stuff. I don't think it really changes the way Marth himself works a whole lot. I do believe FE3 has support where FE1 is not, but that is something that just popped into my mind that I'm not exactly sure of. Other than that, FE1 and FE3 are fairly similar, but I haven't played both enough to really appreciate the differences between them, so I'm not gonna like put my foot in my mouth on here. I think Marth is solid. One cool thing about Marth and Jagan is that I think they take really good advantage of the really strong stat boosters in FE1. Like, your stats are boosted by a greater amount. I don't remember the exact amounts. I think there's like +4 or +3 on some stat boosters. So Marth is of course the best user of the boots, because I mean, he needs to get his butt over to the throne anyway. So if you're not warping, you definitely want to get the boots to him. And even if you are, he's probably still the best candidate just because of the flexibility. For like a game like Shadow Dragon, I could see like Sedgar with boots being a good candidate, but for FE1 and FE3, where Sedgar is complete trash, I would definitely recommend boots on Marth. So really good user of those. I'm gonna put FE3 Marth on the tier lists because just as a compensation for not having FE1, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to like bar submissions from FE1 and FE2 from here on out, because I just can't place them anywhere, and if I graphically add them in, that's just gonna look ugly, and it's gonna be like 10 times more work for me to make a video like this. So we're gonna have to go with FE3 Marth for now. I think FE3 Marth is solid. He has like more move than your average infantry unit generally, although I think he matches hero movement until he gets the boots, of course. But it's really hard to place him anyway, because FE3 Book 1 especially is such an easy game. FE3 Book 2, I guess I should also mention that Marth is like really good in that game. In both New Mystery and Book 2, he just has better bases than his Book 1 and FE1, the Shadow Dragon equivalents. And in those games, he's just better bases, more enemy variety in games where the weapon triangle is relevant. That's not the case for FE3. I guess the turning point is like, is he better than the 3 houses units? And I would say FE1 Marth is, definitely. I think FE1 Marth might be a good candidate for the S tier, honestly. FE3 Marth, I try to take the average of FE3 Book 1 and 2. And in those games, I think Marth is definitely like above average / good. But I don't know exactly how good I would put him. Usually he's like spending his time walking from village to village, and he doesn't have a whole lot of flexibility on what exactly he wants to attack and get EXP. But at the same time, you have a good incentive to feed him kills, especially if you're warp skipping. So he's definitely part of the best playthrough, if you will, the most efficient playthrough. So I find that a little hard to rate. My gut is saying like around here somewhere, taking into account how important he is to warp skipping. I could see him being even higher, but for a more casual playthrough, I think Marth is relatively worse. But let me know what you think. I'm not entirely sure on this guy. The Arcanine games, the early ones, are the ones I have little experience in. So Almond Celica, I actually asked around on the Starlight Discord a little bit, like, hey, what do you guys think is the biggest difference between Almond Celica? Because Boots, I remember I asked this message, like, hey, what would be the difference between Shadows of Valencia, Almond Celica, and the Gaiden ones? Now, it's been a while since I played Gaiden. I played it like 4 times, which is, 4 more times than most people, and 3 more times than the few people that have played Gaiden, probably, because, I don't know, I just love Gaiden. The biggest difference that was brought up is, combat arts, of course. A lot of people like double line on Almond Shadows of Valencia. I think probably he's better off using a bow and getting the killer bow if you can trade it to him every now and then try to master Hunter's Volley, because that's just really good. Generally, they'll end up doing roughly the same, but the killer bow is just such a good weapon, and having extra range on a weapon is just so freaking good. So if you haven't tried that ever, you should try it on Shadows of Valencia. In Gaiden, I think Alm, I got him right here. For Shadows of Valencia, I think the Gaiden Alm is relatively better than most people because his stats stand out a little bit more. I think people in Shadows of Valencia really got buffed growth-wise, and Alm didn't really get buffed very much, I think, if at all. But a lot of people got buffed way more, so he looks relatively worse. But I think mechanically, I think Almond Celica function mostly the same. I think they promote at roughly the same time in the story. Like, Shadows of Valencia is such a faithful remake that not a whole lot has changed on them. I can't even tell you from the top of my head exactly what has changed about Celica. Like, maybe some minor changes to her spell list, but even that I kind of doubt, because the game was really faithful in remaking it. For Alm, the biggest change I think that people mentioned to me is, like, in Gaiden, just bows just have more range. They just have like 1 to 5 range or something ridiculous like that. And in Shadows of Valencia, they tied some of that extra bow range to classes that use bows, like Archer, Sniper, and Bow Knight, and as a result, bows by default, I believe, only have 1 to 2, or 1 to 3 from the top of my head. So almost a little less range with those bows in Shadows of Valencia, and that kind of sucks. But I still remember Alm, like, he's just super good late game, and in the early game I find him good, but like I said in my playthrough, I don't think there's a whole lot of point in feeding a lot of kills to him, because he automatically promotes, and promotion just buffs him to his class bases, and his class bases are so good. And you have no chance of surpassing them while you're training him normally. So I try to use him to weaken other units for them to kill. I think there's like some merit to giving him some XP, but I think it takes a lot of investment to make him something worth investing into. And at that point, I think I'd rather give a bunch of XP to other people to help them promote. But yeah, your mileage may vary. I think Alm roughly ends up in the same spot, and I could grab Celica right now, but I'll just grab her later when she's being submitted. But for the record, I will say I think Guidance, Celica, I don't think she's as good as Alm. I think her things like Seraphim and healing utility and stuff are very nice. I do like that she's available for a time where you don't have many other options, so you're kind of forced to use her, and she's pretty helpful, just like Bowie and May are. I think eventually, once you get people who actually promote sooner and have the capability to one-round things, that like Saber and Kamui, I think those are better units for sure. So I think Celica doesn't rank among the best units in Gaiden, but she's definitely a competent lord. I like her. I like using her a lot. And our spell list is pretty good, it's just their promotion is kind of late and kind of shitty. Alright, next up we have Julian, submitted by Giant Corkscrew, as well as Zane, submitted by the same person. Let me scroll down a little bit without making it look ugly. Here we go. So they were from FE3, in case you couldn't tell by the super cool looking portraits. And Julian in FE3, both books really is just thief utility, not much else. I did actually use Julian and train him on my first FE3 run because I thought his growth were like super nice. It sucks that he doesn't promote, and it kind of sucks that I think he only gets 20 levels. Some people I think want to train Julian always because you have to deploy him in the final chapter of FE3 book 2, but you can just kind of ignore him for most of the game and deploy him for that one. He might get one round if you put him in range, but you have no reason to put him in range. He's not even that good late game, I find, in FE3 book 2. Unless you really go hardcore on training him. But the fact that he doesn't promote, and I mean, you can only use swords, so can most people, especially indoors where dismounting is forced. But I didn't find him particularly great. But with the use of like Star Shards, you can make like anyone good in FE3 book 2. But probably the people who promote are better because they get more levels with the Star Shards. I don't remember exactly what Julian caps. I just know his growths are like really bonkers. His bases are alright in book 2. In book 1, I think it's much less impressive. Not a whole lot he can do that other units cannot, except for picking locks. Picking locks itself is nice though, because FE3 book 1 especially, I think has a lot of treasure and doors that needs to be opened. Book 2 I think a little less so, but there's still stuff for him to do. He does face competition from Ricardo from that utility, and there's also some other items and like even staffs that can open chests every once in a while. So it's not exclusive. It's not like Matthew, who for example, who's the only person who can steal the silver card in the guiding ring. It doesn't have anything exclusive like that. Because I think the first chapter that has treasure in book 1, for example, also has Ricardo. So in that way he gets like half the utility credits. So I wouldn't put him as high as say Chad and Matthew up here. I would put him in like a C tier maybe. So I think it's reasonable to put him somewhere in there. Probably better than Soth though, because I think he has more utility than Soth. I think Soth, if anything, should move down. I think if anything I maybe should, let's see, maybe around Volk level seems around fine. A little better than Volk, I think, relatively. And I think Soth needs to go down a tier, actually. I remember Dundam brought that up. Soth does have very limited utility. And you also get chest keys in FE9 to an extent. So I think I'm going to move him down like around here. I want to say he's a better thief than Ash, for sure. Because Ash's thief utility is kind of a joke. Not a whole lot of locks to pick in 3 houses. So there you go, Giant Corkscrew. There's your Julian submission. Zane actually talked about him recently in my dancer video, because I put him among the dancers. I thought it was a good place for him, and like again in FE3 book 1 and in Shadow Dragon where he's also in, he's really not that good because you can warp skip the game so heavily. So if you're warp skipping, he's very bad because Zane only ever does anything if you use him from turn 2 onwards, and since he takes 1 turn to transform into another unit. But if he transforms into your best unit, that's super good. I think someone actually commented in FE3 actually copies max HP, which I haven't been able to verify yet. But if that's true, that kind of helps. I don't think it's a super big deal, and if anything, it can help you heal someone turn 1 if you don't have anyone available. So I don't think it's a big deal. It's just something I noticed from the comment section. I think Zane, I really liked him in FE3 book 2 and a new mystery as well. Of course, this one is just the FE3 one, but I'm just mentioning the FE12 one for completion's sake. But I really like using him because you usually have some kind of overpowered unit you can copy, and whether that's like a staff utility unit or a godly combat unit like Katria or Pella, it always feels good to have Zane around and have an extra, you know, guaranteed good action. It's kind of like having a dancer, a little different. He doesn't provide the extra mobility that a dancer does, but oftentimes the utility is still there. And if you're just playing casually, I think Zane You can basically consider him your second best unit in every map, basically. He's almost always better than like your 13th or 14th best combat unit or whatever filler you're going to deploy. Zane is always going to be better from turn 2 onwards. If the map is only going to last like say 1 or 2 turns, then he's not going to be as good. But for casual players, I would say Zane is pretty good. Of course, he's available kind of late, so I can't put him too high. But I would say he's better than most of these guys. Like probably better than Lou, for instance. I kind of want to put Astrid around Ike's level because I think it kind of irks me that she's below Ike, and I think Astrid is better than that. So I want to move up Astrid a little bit around above Ike a little bit. I think Astrid is actually better than Ike from the moment not from the moment she joins, but for enough. Like I think she's better than Ike by enough that I think she deserves to be put above him. So this is a tiny fix, but again, let me know if you disagree, and I'll probably not move her back down, but I'm interested to see the discussion. Next meme we have Yumina from FP3, or Yumina. I kind of prefer Yumina, but maybe it's Yumina. I don't know. Anyway, Yumina was submitted by Great Dane. Thank you very much. What I learned when I was making the Cleric Healer tier list is Yumina is the only person who can use the Rescue Staff in FP3, and that's a pretty big deal, because that is the only mobility staff you get until you get Warp. And wow, that's super good. Having the ability to move people around. I mean, you get Rescue, I think in Kadeen, so that's around mid-game, like 10, 11, or 12, I want to say. Rescue is available from Chapter 4 onwards, and in her joining chapter already, it's super good. She's the only one who can get someone like Marth, or maybe not Pala, but like Aaron in a position to help you out. Help out Augman, Castor, and Ubello and stuff. You don't need to as badly in FE3. This is more important in a game like FE12 on Lunatic, where people like Sirius and Augma have a lot more trouble holding off the enemies in the joining chapter. They're getting rushed by all these pirates and stuff. But it's still like a nice option to have, and if anything, she can save Marth time. Like for example, a couple chapters later, chapter 6 I believe, the chapter where you first meet George and where you fight a couple of ballistas and wyverns. You need to have Marth walk all the way to a village in the upper left to get the hammer and staff, and then needs to go all the way back down to Seas. And if you move Marth towards the village, you can move Yumina towards the boss area, the gate, and you can have Yumina rescue Marth once he's done getting the village and save you a bunch of time. And there's a couple like instances like that where the rescue staff just saves you a bunch of time. So I really like that utility. And other than that, just having a staff utility is nice. FE3 has a ton of good staffs, Book 2 especially, stuff like the Again staff, for example, is just super valuable. So I would say Yumina definitely fits in the upper B or lower A tier. This exclusive utility is like pretty damn nice. I'm gonna put her like in this lower party A tier. Trying to think if she's better or worse than most of these people. I think she's definitely better than Arthur. Lachesis also has that exclusive rescue utility stuff, so it makes sense for her to be close, I guess. Maybe hers is a little better because it's so exclusive. Yeah, I would say I could put her over the 3 houses units too. Maybe not Lasithia's warp utility. So around Lasithia utility seems about nice. Let's put her around here for now. She's pretty good. Okay, next up we have Tristan from Fire Emblem 4. If you've never seen his face before, that's probably because you've been diligently making your pairings and you never see the substitutes, but Tristan is the substitute for Dermot, aka what happens if you don't pair Lachesis. You get Tristan and Jan instead of Nana and Dermot. Shame on you if you do that. Lachesis deserves better, and so do Dermot and Nana, but I guess it can't be helped. We gotta have Tristan because Jesus Kun 69 submitted Tristan and Oifi, so we just gotta pair them. Tristan, I've done like 1 or 2 substitute runs of FE4, and units like Tristan, they make me lose all kinds of motivations to play FE4, because like half the fun of playing FE4 is like pairing kids and getting all kinds of cool skill combos and weapon inheritance and stuff like that. And Tristan's like, alright, I don't have pursuit, I have critical though, so I can very unreliably kill one enemy maybe, and if you give me a good sword, then maybe I can reliably kill one, but anyone, like if you give anyone like a 100 kill hero sword, they can kill an enemy, so it's nothing special. What is special about Tristan? He has like 100% health growth, so he always gets HP when he levels up. I would prefer like a higher strength growth, but okay. His other growths like are just kind of whatever. They're okay, but not by FE4 standards, not compared to Dermot's growths would be. And he has a mount and swords, which is okay. If you have pursuit, he would be acceptable, but the lack of pursuit is so annoying. Units like Tristan, I mean, I know I sound like a broken record, but they're hard to rate. If this is in the context of a substitute playthrough, then a unit like Tristan is very annoying to work with because they need something like the Pursuit Ring to start one-rounding reliably, or their Hero Sword. But if you're doing a substitute playthrough, then those things are in very high demand, and they're harder to get because all your units are worse at getting gold. Everyone wants to get the Paragon Ring, everyone wants to get like Pursuit Ring because a lot of substitutes don't even have Pursuit, and money is in short supply. If Tristan is like, if you only forget to pair Lachesis but you paired everyone else somehow, then a unit like Tristan is much less of a burden because you got like a bunch of units that can one round every single enemy ever, and having these resources given to Tristan isn't really a big deal. You know, you can give him some gold with Paddy and then have him buy a bunch of stuff like the Pursuit Ring or the Paragon Ring and be patched up in no time, and he can be sort of functioning. But in the context of a substitute playthrough, I think Tristan works out pretty bad, and I think that's the context most people see him in. I think it's the context that most people would like tier him in. I think the only good substitutes are like Linde, I think her name is actually Linda. Linda is the FE3 unit. Like Linda is a pretty good one. And even then she's like, whatever, kind of unmounted stuff. At least Tristan's mounted. So he has that. And then there's Dimna's pretty good. And other than that, there's not a whole lot of good substitutes. I probably forgot one or two. I guess Hawk is pretty alright. And Aselio can sort of work kind of like Favol can. But yeah, not great. Not great. Still mounted though, so still worth something. Lower B or higher C seems appropriate to me. Kind of like the Brighton vibe is what I'm getting. I don't think he's very good. He can be good if you have like room for investment, but I'm going to assume you don't. And in that case, I'm going to put him down pretty low actually. I really don't think he's very good. But the mount in FE4 deserves a lot of credit. Like, don't get me wrong, just having a mount in FE4 and the ability to use swords, of course, is nice too. That puts him pretty high. Next up is Jesus Kun 69's other submission, Oifi, also from FE4. I would say he's the Oifi of FE4. There's like it's like a sub archetype of the Jagan archetype. I don't really agree with it, but people use it, so it's a thing, I guess. Jagans are usually known for being pre-promotes that join early and like fall off because you have the bad growths, and Oifis are known as those that have good growths and actually keep up with the rest of your army for all the way. And Oifi, in a way, he fits that category. It's a little more complicated than that, I think. Oifi's bases are just so good that I think even if his growths were bad, it wouldn't really make much of a difference. The guy has so much defense. From the top of my head, he's like 40 HP, and then like something like 18 or 20 defense, so it's very hard to kill him off. You can do it if you're really bad at Fire Emblem, but he doesn't die easily. He's got A-rank swords, and what I really noticed in my FE4 Iron Man playthrough, his base magic is so good. From the top of my head, I think he has like 8, and that means that with a magic ring and any kind of magical sword, he can 2-kill almost enemy types. Maybe not armor knights right away because they have a lot of HP, but for example the cavalry in chapter 8 that come with like Ovo, that unique boss. He can 2-kill all those when they're using their javelins, and that just makes him super good. He's also one of the best units to take down Muhammad, who is that general boss with a brave lance and a brave bow in the same chapter. Super annoying to deal with, but Oifi just takes 2 hits and then can counter him with the light brand. It's super nice to have him around. I think there's almost no one else besides like holy weapon users that can really take care of him. So I really like Oifi's utility for basically the whole game actually. Like, he can do that kind of stuff basically all game long. He has pursuit and he has critical. The one drawback, I guess, to him having critical is that you can't really use him to set up kills. I mean, you can try, but sometimes he's gonna crit the enemy and then they'll die, and his Lars says like, damn, dude, you took my kill, you stole my kill. I'm calling the XP police or whatever. So that can be kind of annoying, but I think Oifi is just another one of those early pre-promotes you just gotta use when it feels helpful. Like, I honestly can't think of a single part of the game where Oifi is bad, besides like the Wall of Edda, where you only have like 2 units that can safely go in there without getting put to sleep or silenced or killed by a bunch of meteor tomes. So I don't think there's any point in the game where Oifi falls off, and it doesn't even matter that his growths are like okay. They're alright. He does have like Balder Holy Blood, so his growths are like boosted a little bit, but they're still like, they're not as good as most kids, but they're still pretty fine. And considering how good his bases are and how many level ups he's going to get with those decent growths, I think he's going to hold off for the entire game. I don't know if I would put him like all the way up in S tier. I kind of want to, because he's been so useful for me. Like, the one drawback, I guess, that he has, a very tiny one, is that he needs some kind of good weapon to kill stuff, which goes for like pretty much everyone. Like, if you just give him like a regular silver sword, I think he might not two-shot some of the most common enemy types. Again, this is a problem that like just about everyone has. Like, I think even Seliph doesn't 2-KO some enemy types with a silver sword that I'm like demanding here. Other than that, I think Oifi is just good for the whole gen. I guess the other thing is like FE4 is known to be a very easy game, so having an overpowered unit doesn't change as much as having it in a really difficult game. Like take Pala in FE12 Lunatic, for example. She makes a much bigger difference than Oifi does in FE4. But just talking about like relative power to other units, not a whole lot of units can match him. I think, for example, he's better than Shanna, who joins like one chapter later, is not mounted, and doesn't even have any options besides using swords. So and then the fact that Oifi has better 1-2 range as well, I think he's better than Shannon for the most part. Is he an S tier? I'm inclined to say so, yeah. I'm gonna put him like around here, I think. I think Oifi, weirdly enough, has been getting underrated a little bit. Also, I'd like to take the opportunity to move Kieran down a tier, because, you know, between like mid-game availability and no flying like these other units, I don't think he really belongs in the same tier. I think I'll put him like sooner around here. I still think the ability to do like carry Maniac mode in FE9 is something that deserves recognition, but I think a tier down below is just fine. It's not just because I wanted to make the S tier, I need 2 lines, because there's probably going to be other S tiers anyway, so this is going to be ruined no matter what. So, Inuzuma's Frost other submission is Eris, and this is one I have a face sprite for, thankfully. Eris is solid, and by solid I mean super freaking good. Pretty much everything I said about Oifi applies to Eris, but then he has a holy weapon on top of it, and he joins as a Cavalier chapter later, I guess. Pursuits basically has critical, because the missile team gives critical, and then his attack power is basically the best in the game for that gen. I mean, it's overkill like every other holy weapon, but it gives him a strength bonus, and it has 30 might, and it's a sword, and he doubles, and he crits, and he has adept, and Jesus Christ, this guy is so strong. Eris is so strong that he can just waltz into the wall of Edda. He can fight Arvis. He can do a lot of other things that other people are just like, nope, I'm out of here. He can survive a hit from Ishtar. Sometimes he doesn't survive 2 though, depending on what encounter and what level Eris is. So Adept can be dangerous, but most of the time you can count on Eris to get through, even in fights against holy weapon users. There are fights where I prefer using, say, Selef or Shannon instead of him, or even prefer using Oifi. I find that Eris sometimes doesn't have the requisite speed to double certain enemies, like in Ishtar as an example. Something like Forseti is much better against Ishtar because she has the option to double, or they have the option to double her or adapt her or crit her, and a better chance to dodge her as well. Eris is all those things, but he's usually less reliable at that stuff. But generally I think Eris is reliable at just about anything you want to do in FE4. And I do think someone like Oifi can usually go toe-to-toe with Eris' offensive utility just by using a hero sword instead. But because Eris is a personal weapon, whereas Oifi would be taking the hero sword away from other people, it's questionable whether like one of these is better than the other, I think. But goddamn, Eris is still so good. You can't go wrong with Pursuit, 30 Might Sword, Adept, Critical, and just having enough speed to generally double almost everything. I mean, he's so strong. His joining situation is actually pretty precarious. I think I killed him in my FF4 Iron Man, and I revived him like with the Valkyrie staff later. I didn't send enough people at the Jabaro squad where Eris joins with, so he ended up getting killed because I just couldn't activate any kind of skill against Jabaro, and he just killed one of my units, and it was sad. It was a sad life, but that doesn't mean Eris isn't amazing. I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say he is overall a little worse than Oifi. I think Oifi's utility in Chapter 6 and his ability to like replicate Eris' utility and be better with 1-2 range most of the time, because I don't think Eris' magic is particularly impressive. And if he is not using the missile team, then I think his parameters are actually worse than Oifi for a significant portion of the game. Still think he's better than Radiant Dawn, Ike, and Raisin though, so I'm going to put him like right below Oifi. But yeah, I think Eris is reasonably worse than Oifi. And I think I actually remember Pala Emblem. I'm sorry for name dropping you so much if you're listening. As actually said, yeah, Eris is actually pretty overrated, and most of the time his utility can be replicated with like hero swords. So whatever, bro. So yeah, that's Eris. The next submission is Quan, and was submitted by a person that called himself Dorcas. So thanks, Dorcas. I know what happened to you, but thanks a lot. Quan joins in Generation 1. These units we've been talking about just now are Generation 2 units. Generation 1 is very different in the power dynamic. Gen 2 is like a bunch of overpowered units. Quan definitely stands out more in Gen 1 than I think most of these units do in Gen 2. But he's also like worse himself. He doesn't have Pursuit, he only has Adept, and Adept is pretty unreliable for him. He starts with, I think, around 0 AS, so his Adept rate is about 20%. It's AS plus 20%. This is usually good because that means you can use him to set up kills for other people, but, you know, investing in Quan himself, I need to scroll down more. There we go. Quan is pretty nice to invest into early on, even though he seems like a bit of a Jagan. But in FE4, you don't get less XP for being promoted, so Quan joins at like level 4 from the top of my head. So he gains about the same XP as Sigurd, but as well as like Azel and not Lex because he's Paragon, but like Alec and Noah and Medir and all that, those bros, you know. So and Quan is like really good growth because he's got that major Nova blood. I think that's the latest translation, and that makes him mostly tanky. Like Quan's durability, I think, is his biggest selling point. Even though he joins in like 2 chapters that are filled with axes, he just doesn't care. He takes like almost no damage. If he gets worn down, you have to heal him. He's not going to dodge anything, but it takes him a while to get worn down because he takes some damage, but not a whole lot, and his defense and HP go up like crazy. And sooner you'll just find yourself with a mobile tank. And that takes about 4 chapters, and then he just leaves. He's like, bye, I'm going to go get reinforcements. And that kind of sucks because in chapter 4, it wouldn't have been great, but it would have been nice to have his help, and it cuts into his availability quite a bit. Someone like Medir, for example, has more availability than him. Someone like Alec has more availability than him, Sigurd, etc. That cuts into his utility. I think where he shines the most is once you like go out of Axeland, you go into chapter 2. You have to save Lachesis, and then you have to save the Bargain Ring Village, and you have to go fast. And he's the only unit that has the same move as Sigurd, the only unit that can keep up with him over all these road tiles. He effectively has 12 move for these chapters as long as you keep moving over roads. And that makes the difference even between a promoted mounted unit with 9 move and an unpromoted one like Alec with 8 move. That's still significant because over time, the lead just gets bigger and bigger. And in chapter 2, he also gets access to the Silverlands if you kill Elliot with him or you trade it to him somehow. Through the pawn shop. I usually try to kill Elliot with him just because having the Silverlands is nice for the next part of that chapter. And then at some point he also gives the Bravelands to Finn. And I actually think it's not a bad idea to give the Bravelands to Quan for a bit. Because Quan doesn't have Pursuit, and I mean, he has Adept, which doesn't stack with the Bravelands. Like the Bravelands basically just gives you 100% Adept rate. But Quan doesn't have any way to double besides the Pursuit Ring, and I don't like giving the Pursuit Ring to him. So, giving him the Bravelands lets him just one-round stuff with his huge-ass strength. I don't think I mentioned this yet, but he hits really hard. He can one-shot mages at some point. And Bravelands Toothkill is just about anything. So, if you want Quan to kill stuff, giving the Bravelands to him is good. And Finn, it's nice to give him the Bravelands at first, because at first he won't have that many levels. And the Bravelands will let him quadruple stuff. And besides Armor Knights, I think he can one-round pretty much everything as well with the Bravelands. But for example, in Chapter 3, if you have Finn promoted, which a lot of people do to make him better for Gen 2, if your Finn is already killing stuff with iron or steel, or like a javelin even, then there's no point in giving him the Bravelands. You might as well just give it to Quan for that chapter and have him just tooth KO pretty much anything he encounters. I think he can tooth KO Armor Knights often enough with the Bravelands. He's just that strong. He also gets the Gaybow in Chapter 3, but that's only for a little bit. And generally, I don't even want to use it, because at that point, Quan is kind of done doing stuff. Like, he's going to leave next chapter. You don't need to give him any more training unless you're doing a ranked run. And the Gaybow, it just makes people not attack him, because it makes him even more overkill tanky. It gives him, like, plus 10 defense or something. And Pirates are like, nope, I'm not having any of that. So generally, I don't even bother getting the Gaybow. I think it's, like, insignificant for him in that chapter. And after that, he leaves, and he never comes back, and it kind of sucks. So, I think that leaves him like as a... I think for his... If you only tiered him based on his like chapters prologue to 2 utility, 3 utility, easy S tier. Since he leaves, and since he's like lacking in some areas, like the lack of pursuit is kind of annoying, I think an A tier is solid for him. I'm trying to see if there's like, any other FE4 units I can orient with, but I think there's like Lachesis. I think it's better than Lachesis for the most part. Lachesis has... less utility. I think the rescue utility for Alexis is nice, but I think Quan's is more important and stands out a little bit more. Like Alexis's rescue utility is nice for LTCs and super cool and everything, but before she promotes, she doesn't really do anything. So she joins. She has like the same availability, but less time to make use of it because she has to get out of the Prince's face first. Quan joins battle ready, and he leaves when he's basically going to be. He leaves after a while. He doesn't have any bad phases, so I think Quan is better than Lachesis. So yeah, there you go. Alright, let's go see who we have next. I took a bit of a break between this one and the last one, so and in the meanwhile I realized I forgot to save my changes. So if anything is different than what it was before, that is why I had to automatically or manually restore everything that I did for the first part of this video. So apologies if anything is off. Just let me know in the comments and I'll fix it later. So let's see. The next ones that we have, we got Sed over here. FE4 Sed actually. We have FE5 Sed as well. FE4 Sed was submitted by Michael, so thank you. I think most people who are familiar with Sed from FE4 will know him as like a really good 4 Sed user. He's one of the 3 people who can inherit it, and he is by far the strongest one by raw stats and skills alone because he has Pursuit, unlike the other 2 candidates. So the speed boost of 4 Sed pretty much guarantees you'll double literally everything, even Ishtar. Probably the fastest enemies you face in Gen 2 of FE4, maybe the Falcon Knights, but basically he doubles everything. And on top of that, he has 30 might, adept, pursuit, and critical. Like, I mean, I already said pursuit, but the point is, he murders everything. And his only real flaw is just that he has 6 move, whereas a lot of people will have like 8 to 9, you know, mounted versus unmounted, the good old FE4 problem. And in addition, he has 1 to range. That's really good. But I think by the time he joins, which is pretty late, it's basically Chapter 9, he joins for like the tail end of Chapter 8. I feel like the demand for like really good combat is as low as it's ever been, because at that point, you'll probably have the highest amount of like high kill weapons that you'll have. You'll probably have a light sword with 1 to range and like 50 plus kills on it, as well as a hero sword, so his combat is usually overkill. And I generally find mounted units with good combat, like Selef and Ares and Oifi, more useful, even though Sed's combat is technically better, because they just get to the action sooner, they have more flexibility. You could give him the leg ring and maybe night ring to make up for that. It wouldn't be terrible, it just costs a lot of gold, but Sed can afford it. He can clear the arena easily. You can give him some kind of donations and then he'll probably be good. But I would still prefer to have the leg ring on Selef or my dancer over having it on Sed. But I will say he's an okay candidate for the night ring if you're able to spare him the gold. So his combat is really good, but the demand for it is just kind of low. There's other pairings that make him like really good as well. I actually like the Claude pairing almost better than the Lewin pairing, because Claude gives you access to the Valkyrie staff, which was really useful in my Iron Man run because I kept on killing units, kind of for fun, but still. But also just having like the amount of HP that he heals with staves is like whatever to me. But for example, the access to Fortify and Sleep, he can silence Ishtar if you want him to, that kind of stuff. That just feels very safe to be able to do. Set with a magic ring and silence Ishtar in like both her Chapter 10 and final incarnations, I think, and that can be really nice. And honestly, the loss in combat isn't as great as the stats would suggest. The amount of things that Set can kill with just lightning or Elwind or something like that is about equal. Like, he still 2-hit kills Wyverns easily. They have really high HP, but so he doesn't one-shot them quite, but damn, he still kills. Even if you give him a physical dad, like Noish, for example, is one I really like. Even Jamka can work for him. Honestly, almost any dad can work for Set, because just having Pursuit and Adept no matter what, and then having access to magic just makes him like super good at combat, even if you give him a terrible dad. Even if you gave him Arden as a dad, he'd still be fine. Noish works really well because it just gives him like a bunch of chances to activate skills. He can critical, and he can accost as well. So between Pursuit, Adept, Accost, and critical, there's no way that an enemy that only dies, like, that takes 3 hits to kill is not going to die, even though he's generally only going to, like, by default he only attacks 2 times, but he has so many skills he's going to 3-hit kill everything you want him to. So the low magic isn't really a problem, and the magic isn't even that low. It's like 14 or 17 at base, and combined with like the 14 might of B-rank spells, that's still fine. So Set can work with almost any pairing. He's a good unit regardless, and if you don't care about going fast, then he will definitely be one of your most useful combat units. But if you're trying to play a little bit of faster pace, we gotta give Set some minus points, both for his low mobility as well as his low-ish availability. He's one of the least available units in FE4 Gen 2, only behind people like Altena and Hannibal. So with that in mind, I still think he's like kind of like Pent, who I'm going to evaluate later, and that he's like really good, but only for a short amount of time. But I think he's worse relatively than Pent. I think there's more utility for unmounted units in Pent's game. So I'm not going to put him as high, I'm going to put Pent. I would say like B or C tier. I know C sounds like really low for Set. I know it sounds really low. So for now, I'm okay with putting him in I think he's better than most of these units, in fact. Around Minerva seems about right. I don't know about Saizo. Apparently I'm not going to be able to use him in Conquest, so can't really try him out just yet. I think he's worse than Medir, definitely. That's one person from his own game that I think is worse than. FE5 Sias, Tibarn. Yeah, I'd say he's worse than Tibarn. Better than Sias, I don't know. The more I look at the B tier, the more I see units that I think are better than him. For now, I think I'll settle with him here, but I'm not entirely happy with it. It's like the lower end of the B tier, in case you couldn't tell. It's like a bunch of other units in the B tier that I put him below right now. Like I put him below Cliff, which I think is something that not a lot of people would do. Next up is Hunty Shurix's submission of Sid, also from FE4 Gen 2. There's a lot of Gen 2 today, but there's one Gen 1 left. And I mean, I've put Seth in I put Seliph in the top 15 best units of all time. So I think you know my opinion of him is going to be really high. He's a difficult one to judge though, because he is kind of like Jill from FE10 and some other units. He's the most optimal user of a bunch of resources, and he becomes really, really good when using them. But it's tempting to put that credit not towards him, but the resources he's using, because a ring like the Paragon ring or the leg ring, almost anyone can become good with them. But Seliph converts those resources into more utility than any other unit, and I think that is something that deserves a lot of credit. And any efficient playthrough is going to involve using Seliph to the maximum extent. You are rewarded heavily by relying on Seliph. In case you don't know, the general strategy to playing FE4 fast or easily, or make it as brain dead easy as possible, is at the end of Gen 1, you give Sigurd the most broken rings in the game, so the leg ring. You can give him the light ring, but that one's not really necessary. The Paragon ring is really important. Some kind of good sword. If you want him to have a good one to range, you can give him like a high kill light sword. If you don't care about that, you can go with the hero sword. A lot of people like to use the silver sword. And then you have like 2 or 3 other slots. I generally prefer the shield ring to keep him alive, speed ring to give him extra avoid against the axe users in the chapter 6, and you just try to kill as many enemies as possible in chapter 6. He has a really good conversion rate on the XP, because the sooner you're able to promote him to like get him to level 20, promote him to a mount, he just becomes so much better. He kind of becomes a Jagan almost, but a really, really strong one. His stats will surpass anyone ever, like even Oifi. He'll be better than Shanna despite, you know, the combat difference because of the mount and everything. He just becomes super, super good. You could do the same for any other unit in Gen 2, at least the chapter 6 unit. Like if you gave the same resources to Larce, sure, he'd still be good, but you'd still be waiting on Seliph to catch up. And Larce would not get a mount out of it. She would not gain extra move from a promotion. And you also lose the ability to just end, you know, a castle, just seize the castle. And I don't like giving credit for seizing. I think that's a little bit backwards. But at the same time, it is the most efficient way to play FE4. And for that reason, it is convenient for the player to give the resources to Seliph that he needs to shine. And when you give Seliph those resources, he is easily the best unit in the game. Maybe only behind Sigurd. Like, there's no question, to me at least, that Seliph belongs in the S tier. Now, whether he's still a top 15 unit, I've seen some people come up with some convincing arguments that he's not. I remember General Horus, for example, a really good LTC player, brought up to me that maybe Seliph doesn't deserve to be up there all the way. Like, maybe he's not a top 15 unit as I thought he was. But I still think he belongs in this tier, and I still think he's more useful than these units. It's just how much do you penalize him for using those resources? And keep in mind, he's inheriting them for chapter 6. But once he's gotten them in chapter 6, he actually doesn't need them anymore. I usually sell the Paragon ring for sure, so other units can use it, definitely. The leg ring I like to keep on him because he's just the most convenient user of it. I think he's still the best user of it by far. Only arguably contested by the Dancer, which I discussed a lot in the Dancer episode of the archetype tier lists. But even then, I think Seliph is better with the leg ring. Just having a 12 move unit capable of destroying anything with his insane stats. Like, he just trivializes entire maps if you want him to. It's so broken to have a broken Seliph. I just can't stress that enough. I am willing to move him down a little bit compared to normally, but I do think he belongs over these units that are like S tier. Like, if I had an S plus and S minus tier, which I plan on making at one point, I think I'll consider it for like next episode. This would definitely roughly where I draw the line. But goddamn, Seliph is so powerful. For now, I think I'm most comfortable putting him around here, and this does put him like top 15 range for now still. But I think there will be other units in here that are going to surpass him eventually to kick him out of the top 15. That's my prediction. I think Seliph belongs in S tier still, despite the fact that he uses resources, because there's like 2 ways of looking at it. You can look at it, all right, this unit needs resources, and that means the rest of your army doesn't get those resources, so we should penalize him. And the other side, I think, is you have these resources available, and you got to give them to the unit that uses them the best to get the most utility. So we should give him credit for being able to convert the stat boosters and the rings and everything else and the good weapons into something useful. So basically, their utility is boosted by being able to use resources better. If you have a unit that's like right on the doubling threshold in like GBA, for example, being able to make him double with a speed wing, sure, it sucks that they need the speed wing, but if he can use it to become better, then I still think that is something that is worth considering and adding to their tier list value. So we shouldn't throw out the use of resources as something that just doesn't matter for tiering. We should evaluate just how well they use the resources and who else can get utility from it. And I don't think it's the most fair way to evaluate, but it's a very complicated thing. So actually a more interesting unit than you might think. Waifu Self win? I don't know, man. Okay, next up, let's see, we just did Self, and now we got Lewin, submitted by MaxTM, thank you. And Lewin kind of had the same problem as Zed that I mentioned last time, or a little bit ago, where the combat from Horse City is kind of overrated and overvalued, and the lack of movements, and in this case the lack of pursuit as well, and lack of availability not so much. But generally I think the flaws of Lewin used to get really overlooked, whereas the pros of Lewin, like his really high stats with Forseti and I mean his cool aesthetics, honestly, those usually get put into the spotlight. Nowadays I think people are more mellow about Lewin for most of the time when they're actually evaluating him for something like a tier list or a discussion about unit utility. And I think people generally see now that Lewin is not that great, because if you were to describe him when he joins in Chapter 2, it's a foot unit with no pursuit, and there's not many units that can really survive being that. Now, the lack of pursuit I don't think hurts him that much compared to other foot units. Like, if you look at the other foot units like Holden and Ira, they don't usually 2-hit KO a lot of enemies. They need like the Brave Sword to get a reliable 1-hit KO or 1-round KO, because without Astra or Luna, they're just not going to 1-round KO anything with something like a Steel Blade, except like mages. Lewin is in the same boat, kind of. Without an activation rate, he's not going to 1-round KO, but if he gets one, he's still going to kill. Like, if he just gets adept or critical, he's going to kill something. And, if they're not, then they're just kind of 2-shot. Now, Pursuit will help Ira and Holland to get another chance at getting an activation. They get 2 shots at it, whereas Lewin only gets 1. But Lewin has critical and Adept, so he still has 2 shots. And Adept has a higher activation rate than Astra and Luna, so I still think he's more reliable at killing stuff. So, and of course, Lewin is still fine in the arena. Like, the lack of Pursuit doesn't really hurt him there. Even if he loses, you can just like spam into the arena until he wins. Just because through his high avoid and critical and Adept, he's still going to win eventually. So it doesn't hurt him much in the arena. So I think Lewin is just fine at combat if you can get there. But if you don't 1-round KO in NFE4, then it's like really tough to justify even putting him in the front lines. And he's an okay candidate for the Pursuit Ring. He joins very near the Bargain Ring, and he's an okay candidate for it. I like putting it on Sylvia or Ethelyn more, but I can see Lewin working sometimes. If you give him the Bargain Ring, then it becomes easier to buy the Pursuit Ring as well as the Paragon Ring, getting closer to promotion. It becomes more viable for him to even get the leg ring if you're into that. So we can be okay for that, but I don't think it's a good investment. I don't think it's nearly as good as an investment as, say, putting these boosters on Selef for Gen 2, for example. So I think that leaves Lewin. I don't think I tiered Ira and Holden yet. I'm looking for like other FE4 units in the tiers right now for reference, and I'm seeing like Patty, and that's about it. I'm seeing like Tristan, who's like a mounted unit, so it's kind of hard to rate him. I would say like, if it was like a strict LTC tier list, I honestly think he belongs in D tier. Like, honestly, he's not that good for that. Obviously, this is like far from that. I think we can at least bump him up to C tier. And the question is, where in C tier? Is he worse than Patty? Maybe not. I just don't think Patty is that good, to be perfectly honest. But for ranked runs, I gave her a bit of credit for ranked runs, I think. So that's why she's up a little higher. And like helping Leaf promote or helping other units get the Paragon Ring is pretty useful. I think what Lewin has to offer, like objectively, for like a faster playthrough is not that good. I think he feels better than like Lawrence for me, and I don't know about Ford. I think he's actually worse than Ford if I put aside my bias for a moment. Let's see. I think around Joshua is kind of what I'm feeling right now, like somewhere around here, maybe above. Somewhere around here, I think. I think he feels better than Tristan to a lot of people, obviously, because Tristan is a substitute. We'll just go with around here for now. I will say you could argue him lower, definitely, because no mount and no pursuit is definitely kind of bad. Alright, next up we got Corey's submission of Homer. Homer is a bard that joins in Thracia chapter 14, so like halfway through the game, and he promotes into a sage. So once he promotes, he kind of becomes like Aspel but without Graph Caliber, but he has like really good pursuit critical, so his offense becomes great. So the question with Homer is mostly like, is it worth training him up and getting through there. Getting through his like initial annoying start to make him like into a really good combat unit, at least offensively. I do think there are some really good things about Homer. One of them is Paragon. Like the fact that he joins at level 5 and promotes it into a Sage at level 10 if you want him to means that this guy is pretty easy to raise if you want him to be. He joins in a chapter where EXP is plentiful and he can't advance any faster than normally. He's not going to contribute much to actually making the chapter easier. He can't disable ballistas, he can't enemy phase a bunch of armor knights, he can't kill bosses. But he's good enough to pick up EXP. I don't think he doubles reliably unless you give him like a Thunder or Fire Tome. Annoyingly, he can't use Wind at base. He can only use Wind once he promotes into a Sage. For some reason, he doesn't have the ranks for it. He also joins with a Light Tome. That one's not very good on him. I usually put that on Safi, but you can use it if you need the extra might, I guess. There was something else. I guess once he promotes, he can use Nosferatu. Actually, he gains like +2 light rank, I believe, and that puts him like a B light, and that lets him use Nosferatu. That's actually a pretty good fix to his durability problem. His HP and defense are kind of low, as are most mages and sages in Thracia. But with Nosferatu, he can just like take a hit and then get the HP back, and he has enough speed to double, even though Nosferatu is kind of heavy and he doesn't have any way to negate the speed. He's pretty good against Dark Mages when using Nosferatu, and he's going to reliably crit too. I don't remember if Nosferatu has any extra crit on it, but his skill growth is good enough, and he has Precision Critical 5, as well as a support bonus that will let him hit like 90 crit at least. If you just put Nana in his range, he's going to get Charm and her support bonus, and then he's going to crit everything with Nosferatu. And even without Nosferatu, he's going to get decent Avoid. His growths are just like good. Even especially like you can easily make use of scrolls with him because he levels up so fast. If you give him a scroll for like 1 turn and somehow find him able to get a bunch of kills, it's rare, but you can set it up somehow, then he's good. Chapter 14X is also like an okay opportunity to train him. Chapter 15, not much is happening either, so you can kill some bandits for XP there, and just a little bit of kills is going to go a long way, especially if you're playing Paragon mode, and he's going to grow so fast. One funny experience I had with Homer is in my very first FE5 Iron Man run. For some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to attack the Chapter 20 boss as like a really strong Baron with Pavise. And I was like, you know what, Homer is kind of okay durable, right? So I can probably attack this guy. And the guy has a Master Lance, which is a Brave Lance that hits from 1 to range. So I thought I was like, alright, if I just dodge 1, I can kill this guy. Because I was really having trouble with him and I needed to kill him for that turn. I remember that very distinctly. And I attacked, and the boss just straight up one-hit kills him. It's like, wow, I misread the numbers. I didn't realize he would get one-hit killed. So that was the death of Homer, my very first Iron Man run. Ever since, I've been a little bit more protective of Homer when I train him, because he's definitely worth the training. Is it worth the pain? I would say so. If you want to, if you got space on who you want to use, you might have like you want to use another unit, or if you're playing Iron Man and you lost some key units, you want to replace someone. I think he's just fine. Obviously, a little bit of an annoying start, but nothing that Chapter 14 can't fix. I think he's pretty good. I don't think he's better than Parn. I think Parn's utility out of the box is better. Maybe not by an entire tier, but I think he belongs a little bit below. Worse than these like free utility units, I guess. But I think in the long term, I would find him pretty useful. I put him like around Sias. Sias is like much better when he joins. Like A rank stats, you can't really compete with that. Homer's around for longer, but he doesn't have a warm up period. So I'm gonna put him like around here for now. Maybe B tier is a little high. I remember when I was rating him for Manx' Let's Play, I was very torn between him for 3 and 4 stars, and he rated him 4 stars. I was like, alright, I'll just go with 3 stars, and that gives you a good, approximation of how good he is. Somewhere between 3 and 4 stars, I think. Okay, here we have another set, but this one was submitted by Hunty Shurix, so thank you very much. And this set is from FE5. Naturally, I'm inclined to move him towards Sias because I think they are similar, more similar than some people might think. But like, if you join that late and you have A-rank staves, almost 90% of what you do is going to be similar. The biggest gap that set has in utility over Sias is, of course, combat. Like, he has Forseti, he has a bazillion more attack avoid, and he's going to kill everything. Sias, his magic isn't bad, but his attack speed is sometimes not enough to double. I think he still one-rounds Dark Mages as long as they're not like having a huge magic advantage on him through like a magic tile. But his magic is actually higher, so he's closer to reaching thresholds that Set cannot. So, and Sias also has leadership, so I think they're pretty close together. So for now, I'm going to put them next to each other and then talk about it more a little bit. So Set has some leadership, but Sias has more. I don't remember exactly how much the gap is. I think it's 2 or 3 stars. That can make a big difference in the final chapter where you face a lot of enemy leadership, so your hit rates aren't as reliable and you need the boosts more. But at the same time, that leadership also makes Sid's higher reliability in combat more viable. And the fact that he can just nuke a strong boss or an armor knight or a dark mage without having to rely on a crit, which Size is not very good at, is very valuable as well. And in the previous chapters, both of them are both just gonna sleep stuff, silent stuff, maybe restore someone, warp or rewarp around, and that's 90% of their utility in my opinion. But I've definitely been in spots where Set's Force Heady just bails me out of a tough situation. There's enemy knights, enemy armors in the final chapter that have, say, master knights or master axes, master bows, and Set is infinitely better at killing those. I think Set, for most players, will be the better unit to recruit. I think he's easier to put to use, and I think they could use a unit as a failsafe a lot more. I think for advanced players, especially people who want to like LTC the game, I can see Sai as being more useful. He doesn't cost a turn to recruit like Set does due to the way that the recruitment chapter joins, or that the recruitment chapter works. So for LTC players, it's actually preferable to pick up Sias if you really want to be anal about taking turns. And I think there is merit to his utility over Sed's if you already have strong combat units. If you have another unit that can replicate Sed's reliable kills, for example, Sarah or Lenoan with Nosferatu and Wrath can often do the same things as Set can in certain situations. Not in a situation like Master Bows, but in a situation where you just have to kill a strong enemy phase. It doesn't really matter whether you use Set or Lenoan or Sarah sometimes, but it depends on the situation. For now, I think Set for most players will be better, but I think these units are very, very similar. Next on this train are Dean and Edda, submitted as a pair by command list. Thank you very much. I absolutely love Dean. I think he's a super fantastic unit to use for the chapter where he joins. Maybe not as much, but like the next 4 or 5 chapters, he's absolutely beastly. And even after that, when you have to go indoors, he's fine. He is a Wyvern. I don't remember exactly what his class is called, News Translation, but he's a promoted Wyvern, basically. A Wyvern Lord, a Dragon Lord, I don't even remember. The point is, he has A lances, he has A swords when going indoors. He's got a lot of movement, he's pretty durable. He doesn't survive just about everything you throw him in. He can definitely die in his joining chapter, especially when the ballistas are involved. But after that, he's generally pretty tanky, and something like an enemy Pegasus Knight is going to be a bit of a joke to him. Doesn't like Dark Mages very much. I've experienced that firsthand. But other than that, not a whole lot of things are going to take him down. He's very strong. He has a personal weapon called the Dragon Lance. It's kind of tough to get in his joining chapter, and I don't recommend it for newer players unless they know what they're doing by looking it up beforehand, because it puts him at risk of like a ballista and a boss with tornado that's effective on him. So it's going to be kind of risky. Even with just a killer lance, I think Dean kills enemies just fine. He has hyper super critical, and his personal weapon is actually a little bit inaccurate. But the cool thing about the Dragon Lance is that it is not just personal, but it also is brave. And I don't remember the stats offhand. It's like really good might is not a good thing about it. And I remember it gave him, I think it gave him Vantage, but I'm not entirely sure anymore. But it is really strong. It's great for capturing. Not as good as the Brave Lance on Finn because it's not as accurate, but it's still really powerful. But if you don't get it, Dean will still be a useful unit, is the point I'm making here. And indoors, what I like about him is you can use the Sleep Sword, which makes him useful for putting Xavier's Armor Knights to sleep. And in general, just killing enemies with like an Armor Slayer or a Master Sword or whatever you want him to is just going to be pretty good. So with that in mind, I think Dean is very good for the moment he joins for the rest of the game. Definitely one of those strong pre-promotes that I definitely think belongs at least in B tier. And from there, it's kind of tough to figure out exactly where to put him. Like above Cecilia, I think is fair. His combat is definitely way above Cecilia's, and utility-wise, between capturing and rescue dropping people and all that kind of stuff, I think it's fair to say that he has some utility as well. So I think Baruka, these units are like kind of iffy sometimes, whereas Dean is never bad. He just isn't available as much. Better than Geets and Hawkeye, I do think so. Better than Garrick, yeah, I think so. Better than Alexia. Top of B tier, I think, seems fair for him. Maybe not above Setgar and his ridiculous ability to like trivialize normal mode, but I think B tier is pretty solid for him. I'm kind of wondering if maybe he belongs in A tier. Looking at it, there's a lot of units that are like similar. Quan has similar availability due to the way I look at FE4's gen system. I've explained this a little bit ago. So maybe he belongs higher than this. Yeah, I think actually I would like him to be closer to Quan overall. I think he feels more similar to Quan, as well as Tanith. Tanith is another unit that's like comparable to him, like really good combat flyer, joins mid-late. Mostly more mid than late than anything. I would say he belongs around here somewhere. I think this is fair for him. Dean is definitely a standout unit in FE5. Just the availability kind of cuts into him. If he was around for all game, easy S tier. Easy S tier. Now, Edda is not that similar to Dean. It's like the same availability and same-ish clash, fire utility and everything. But the combat is much more lacking. Edda has some trouble doubling. Not a whole lot, but she has some trouble doubling and with killing enemies as well. She doesn't have any kind of crit setup that Dean has. She can't use the Killer Lance and the Silver Lance actually because she's got a B rank in lances. But those weigh her down a fair bit. Her con is a lot worse. And if you don't double and you don't kill as reliably, it's really going to struggle. She can't really capture either. Still makes her pretty useful for next few chapters. I like her a lot in 14X, rescuing civilians, helping people that have been captured by Pegasus Knights get back up, take dropping from people. And then 15 has a lot of flyer utility because you gotta get over the mountains to save Ralph and the villages and stuff like that. The route split chapters have a lot of utility for flyers. Once you go indoors though, Edda is basically worthless. I don't remember her sword rank, but I don't remember it being particularly good. It's definitely not an A rank. I believe she might even have an E rank, which is just horrible and not very good. Not very good for fighting at all. So not the standout units to fight with in indoor maps, and basically after chapter 22 or so, she's basically worthless. So putting XP into her is not great. There might be some points where you might want to get her promoted for the route split chapters, but that requires feeding her a lot of XP. I prefer using her when she's useful and then benching her when she's not. So I think like a C tier is kind of what I'd make of her. Useful for a little bit, but only temporary. Kind of like Brighton. Kind of like maybe not Olwen, like Joshua. Kind of like this feels like the right tier for her for the most part. I would say she's a little better than Brighton, but not by a whole lot. So I'm gonna put her around here for now. I think that's fair. Alright, lots of FE5 today. Next up we have Sarah and Tina, submitted as a pair by Scott. Thank you very much. I gotta say, I really love both of these units. I've already said staff utility in Thracia is super good, and both of these units have it. Sarah joins with B rank staves at level 7 in the route split chapters. Depends on which route you go. One of them she joins in 16, the other one she joins in 17, so she has some important chapters left. Not like the whole game, it's like a mid-late joiner, but goddamn, staff utility is just way too good to overlook. And Sarah is generally, once they've all been raised and they're like high level, she's definitely the best one of them for quite a while, because her magic is going to easily cap at 20, so she can do anything you want her to, and her staff rank barely requires investment, unlike say Tina and Lenoan. She joins with B at base, and she's 3 level from promotion, and she joins with Paragon, so her level's just like, you can promote her basically the moment you want her to, as long as you use a staff every turn or get a kill with her every turn, which is easily doable because she can use magic. She can kill like an Armor Knight or something somewhere in chapter 17 or 18, and she's basically done. And her growths are super good in like magic skill speed. Obviously not in HP and defense. Trash HP and defense, just like Sarah and Tina and all the others, or not like Safi and the others. But goddamn, she's so strong. She also has Wrath, which is basically irrelevant, I think. Unless you're doing some Nosferatu tanking late game, I don't think she should be getting combat. And she can actually get one-shot by a lot of things. Even a hand axe or a javelin can just insta-kill her. So you have to be careful. But a unit that has access to rewarp is just, it should never be in range of enemies. Like, there's no excuse, really. And when you can use your staffs from infinite range as well, it's like, why would you put her in range of combat? Same for Miracle, I think it's mostly irrelevant. She has 5 movement stars, which means you can't rely on her moving again, but she has a 25% chance to. So what I can do, for example, if I'm doing something complicated on turn 1, like getting a warp skip and wanting to get a lot of villages or something, I will try her first, see if she gets a movement star or not, and if she does, I have a better idea of what I can actually accomplish that turn, like visit an extra village, maybe in the Reinhardt chapter, for example, or talk to Reinhardt with Olwen, that kind of stuff. That is the stuff that the movement stars allow you to do sometimes. And when you're playing slower and more casually, at least once during a chapter, Sarah will activate movement star to do something for you, so she can heal someone extra so they can attack instead of using vulnerate, that kind of stuff. That's nice. It's not super good, but it's nice. The biggest utility is just really quick 20 magic staff user with A rank. Can use rewarp, restore, magic up, warp, rescue. So you can use the Kia staff the moment you need to. That's like she's the only unit that can use it, but I'm not going to give her much credit for it because it's almost like a story action more than anything. But it is something that she can do and has to do, in fact, if you want to hashtag do it for Avel. So yeah, I'm going to say Sarah is like an easy A tier for sure. S tier not because, you know, no availability to speak of, or not as much availability as I would like to. But I think she's better than most of these units for sure. I would put her around here. Maybe not better than Dagnar and Finn because they're around for so much longer. But if you look at like the late game, for example, the amount of stuff that she gets done that you need her for is just so huge. And the thing about Thrace is, like, even though there are a lot of units like Sarah that have like her level of utility, sort of, you need all those units. So it's like one warp user doesn't mean you don't want another. There are many chapters where you want multiple warps, silences, sleeps, berserks, restores, all that kind of stuff. The more you have access to on turn 1, the better. It's so broken to be able to preempt enemy status staff users with the sleep staff or silence staff for the last few chapters. It makes those chapters so much less painful. And she's not superfluous in any chapter after she joins. Fatigue can be kind of annoying though, because her HP is kind of low. But I think at that point in the game, you should have the S-strings to take care of it. Both 14 and 14X offer a lot of S-strings for you to get, either through buying or through saving civilians. And she's the best user of those S-strings, so I don't think fatigue is a huge issue, and I think it should be worked around rather than something that actually like hurts her deployment. Sarah is almost always a good use of the S-strings that you have. Next up, I have a Tina. We're still on the submissions by Scott. So Tina is Safi's sister. She joins like halfway through the game, and she has 2 personal staffs that set her apart from all the other staff users, the Unlock staff and the Thief staff. Unlock staff is just nice. It works kind of like an FE3. You just unlock a door or a chest at long range, however much range you want. But the Thief staff is special because it gives you access to pretty much every weapon in the game that's on an enemy ever. Mostly useful for stealing the sleep sword, but also useful for getting like status staves and other stuff like that. The only limiting factor is Tina's low magic. She has like 1 base or something. It's like really low, maybe 5 base. You can boost it with magic up and then she'll have access to more. You can use it to steal ballistas in chapter 14 to negate those, for example. All that is really useful. Outside of those personal staffs, she can't really do much early on because her staff rank is literally E, and it takes forever to build up. But the personal staffs give her a lot of staff XP. And what happens a lot with Tina is that she'll miss with her personal staffs because her base skill is like 1, which means her staff hit is like around 60 to 70 early on. And missing is like when you want her to hit at that moment, like if you're actually screwed over if she misses, that sucks. But if you don't care very much and you're just spamming staffs to get staff rank, missing is one of the best things that can happen to you because you'll still get the staff XP, but you won't consume a use. And the Thief staff only has 4 uses, I believe Unlock has 3. Maybe I'm mixing it up, but either way they have low uses. And the more uses you get out of them without breaking them, the better. So if she misses, it's just free staff XP. And personal staffs give a lot of staff XP. I believe she gets 5 or 10 per use, which is insane. Like most staffs only give 2. It depends on the staff rank. But when you're at E rank staffs, you can only use heals. So you're only getting 2 per use. It's like, damn, I think it's actually 1. It's either way, it's a huge boost to her weapon XP count, and that is super nice for her. You can't rely on it, obviously. And speaking of unreliable, she also has 5 moon stars, just like Sarah. So I like to call the Tina experience. It's like you try to use a staff and she misses, then she gets a movement star, and she tries to use a staff again and she misses again. That is the Tina experience, but that actually is like a pretty good case scenario for her early on. Now late game, you actually want her skill to get boosted. You want her to hit, you don't want her to miss. With like a personal staff, or even if you're able to use them like a sleep staff. That sounds like a big dream to be able to use high rank staff with Tina, but I found that if you like diligently put the effort into like getting Tina's staff rank up, especially in a chapter like chapter 14 where you're just standing around doing nothing a lot, getting heals in with her whenever she can, and actually promoting her when you can, that can actually get her staff rank up to like B or A in what shouldn't be as fast, but it's pretty worth it because every A rank staff use that you get is worth it. Now Tina might have some trouble reaching 20 magic depending on how many levels you give her though. So that can be kind of tough, but she can still do the lower magic target things that you need her to do anyway. Warping someone doesn't take a lot of magic, for example. Rescuing someone doesn't take any magic. So just leave the sleeping and silencing to other people if you have to, but she's still very useful. And just like Sarah, having 5 movement stars on an A rank staff user late in the game can give you so much extra reach with your staffs. It's like super nice to have. And the personal staffs, just giving you access to like a ballista to disable or treasure somewhere. She's the only one I think who can get the body ring in chapter 18, for example, which is very useful for Parn, because without that body ring, I don't think he can steal warp staves, and that body ring alone lets him steal the warp staves from chapter 21X, and that's like 6 free warp staves that you get. So in a way, Tina should get credit for those. And in that same chapter where Parn steals those, she is also very useful for taking warp staves off of enemies and giving you those. So the huge amount of warp staves you have late in the game, you have them basically thanks to Tina alone, and I think that alone warrants her at a very high ranking. I think she's worse than Safi, but I do think she belongs in S tier actually. I do think she's that good. I kind of reminded of Jake actually for her utility, as well as Laura. I'm gonna put her like below Laura. I think Laura's utility over the game overall is even more useful. Dancing for people like Tina is still better than just what Tina can do, but I still think it's up there. I think Tina is just that good. I think she's absolutely excellent. Alright, next up we got Illios, also from FE5, submitted by Max TM. And Illios is someone I think that when you look at his stats on paper, you realize that he's got to be really, really good. I mean, he has A rank in Thunder, he's got A rank in Swords, his stats are decent. I remember his Strength and Magic are like, they don't look particularly great for a late game joiner that's basically not going to level up a whole lot anymore because of his high level. But they're sufficient to KO with more powerful weapons, and he can use those powerful weapons. There's no reason not to use them. Like he used Thoron, Master Sword, Rapier or something if you want to go that way, but he can use like every other kind of magic that you want him to. He has bolting from the start. I think he's the only character from the start that can use bolting, other than maybe like Set or something, but that is a niche you can do. I mean, Owen can use it too. When it comes to like Owen versus Illios, I've always thought that Illios was the better unit from the moment he joins, but the availability kind of puts it back into Owen's favor almost. I don't think he's much better or worse than Owen overall. I remember on Dawn's 0% growth run, Olwen was definitely the worst unit between the two, but it only makes sense because one of Olwen's good traits is her growth. And the reason these two are compared so much, if you don't know, is you can only recruit one of them. So even though they're not like on a route split or anything, like for example a Barter and a Kidnap from FE6, the way it works is like you recruit Olwen in chapter 11, and Illios appears in chapter 17A route only, and if you have Olwen alive in your party or she's captured, then you cannot recruit Illios. But if she is dead or not recruited, then you can just recruit Illios with Karen, and there's nothing in the game indicating this, so it's pretty tricky to figure out if you're not using like a guidebook or looking it up online. But if you do have you know, the requisites to recruit him, which basically no Olwen, and you have Karen, then there's no reason not to recruit him because he's just super useful. Personally, by the time Illios joins, I haven't found him better than like a trained unit from the start. Like I find someone like Fergus or someone like Salem, or a lot of these units are just more useful, either through their combat or utility. But nonetheless, you cannot ignore the fact that that Illios is still pretty versatile. He still has the ability to use like an Armor Slayer against a Chapter 20 Armor Knight, for example, to just one-round them straight up from base, and that's something he should be credited for. But I'm not sure if he's better overall than Olwen or not. I think by the time that Illios joins, Olwen can use bolting just as well as Illios can, and she's definitely going to have the magic to do it just as effectively. So it's just a matter of what you value more, a bit of availability, but you have to put some more resources into them, and you might have to like shield her a little bit from action or give her advantage and hope she hits with Dire Thunder to make up for poor durability. Or you have a unit that's more tanky like Illios, because his HP is like a lot higher and his defense is a lot higher too, so he's definitely better for enemy phase than Olwen is. But Olwen has a better play phase offense, I feel like, with Dire Thunder sometimes. Kind of depends, because there's a lot of enemies that he can one round too. So in a 1v1 comparison, I think Illios wins. He just does the ability way out. I'm personally tempted to put Illios over Olwen, and in fact I would even put him like over some of these mediocre units from Thracia. Probably Edda too. Probably Tristan, Lewin. Yeah, he's better than these mostly mediocre units, I think. Maybe even a tier above. I might be underrating him, but his availability is so low and there's no staff utility or anything to compensate for it. At the same time, you know, let me see. I do think he's significantly worse than Set and Size, despite the fact that they join a couple chapters later, like 5 chapters later for the most part. So I think a tier gap between him and Size and Set is reasonable. So, and I don't see any other FE5 units. I guess Morita, I don't know whether I'd say he's better or worse than Morita. I would say he's about on par, really. I'm gonna put it like right here. Looks like a big gap between him and Olwen, but it's like within the same tier, so it's not a really huge gap. Okay, next up we got some FE6 units. We got Shanna, Sue, and Noah. Shanna was submitted by Jean, thank you. And I made a whole waifu video basically on Shanna, but that was before I had waifu, so it was just a Pitfalls episode. I think it was Pitfall 6 on the top of my head. Unit from Iffy 6, Pitfall 6, that makes sense. And I was very elaborate on why I think Shanna was good. Ever since then, I've only done like one complete run of Iffy 6 vanilla, and that was my Iron Man run where she actually died. She was one of the first people to die in that one. Also one of the only ones. I think like 4 people died total. And she died because I was memeing a little bit. I was training Wendy in the 14X, the guy in chapter with all the water tiles that disappear. And for some dumb reason, I had her hold on to Wendy to, you know, I had her rescued because she got trapped in the water tiles, I think. So Shanna rescued her while she was holding a javelin. A pirate attacked her and died, and she just died. If I equipped an iron sword on her instead, she would have had way more avoid than AS. She wouldn't have been doubled. She probably would have dodged, and she would have been fine. So it was all my fault that she died, but nonetheless, that kind of left a sour taste in my mouth for Shanna compared to when I made the Pitfalls episode, where I was like, wow, Shanna is actually really good. So right now, my opinion on her is a little bit in between. It's hard to like rate her really highly after what happened there, but at the same time, she still has all the pros that I named in the Pitfalls episode. In short, what it comes down to is Shanna's offense and defense are kind of underrated in the early game. She can often do more damage and take more hits than people give her credit for, and it's actually pretty easy to free her kills because she's so flexible as a early game flyer that can, you know, ignore terrain, and she's actually one of your fastest units. Like besides Rutger, no one is really faster than Shanna in the early game, so that usually compensates for somewhat low strength, and her strength is like the same as Lance's basically, and Lance is a unit a lot of people like. I figured out, actually while thinking about this today, I figured out that one more reason that people might underrate Shanna's offense compared to, say, the Christmas Calves is I think people in the early game hard mode of FE6, they will often build up supports between Alan and Lance, but they will not do the same for Shanna, even though she has a support with like Deke, Lot, and Wade. Understandably, because those units don't work with Shanna as well as Alan and Lance do together. They don't have similar movement, and Shanna will often fly off and do other things. So it makes sense. But I think if you're training Shanna, you're serious about using her, I think making a support with her and Deke makes a lot of sense. Now that is like Thunder Wind, I think, which is not the greatest combo, but it gives full crit at least, and you know, some avoid and some attack, so it still helps a little bit. But I understand prioritizing other supports in the early game because despite like it's not just the affinities that don't work as well together and the movement difference. It's also like it's just less of a good pairing than like Alan and Lance. It just feels more natural to pair Alan and Lance, especially with Roy in there. You know, you want to keep Roy alive in the early game, especially when you're doing an Iron Man. So I understand Shanna not being much of a priority for support building, but nonetheless, I think that is something that you should try if you're having trouble keeping Shanna alive in the early game. But in short, Shanna doubles a lot of stuff. Even when weighing herself down, she can still double soldiers and then later on calves and archers. And that usually compensates for the attack difference between her and other people, and then some. And then when she gets killed lances, she actually has a pretty good shot of one round killing enemies as long as she gets a crit. Unless it's like a pretty bulky enemy, then sometimes you might need 2 crits, which is kind of hard to ask for. But a lot of enemies will die to 1 crit. What's really good about her is if you train her to level 10 plus, I usually assume like 11 to 12 at around chapter 8, and then at the end of chapter 8 you get an Legion Whip from a chest. You use that to promote her, and then you have an 8 move flyer that can use swords for the Western Isles, where you're facing a lot of axe users. And in the early game, Shanna has no means to circumvent her axe weakness, but in the Western Isles, she'll be able to use swords, and axes have trash hit. Shanna has insane avoid because her speed is so good, her luck is so good, she has weapon triangle advantage, she doesn't get weighed down anymore. So from there on out, she's like a dodge tank, and she can easily train her sword rank. It starts at E when she promotes, which is super low for the mid game, but when she promotes and starts using her sword more, she gets 2 weapon XP for every battle, +1 if she kills the enemy with an iron sword hit, and she'll probably get to like D or C pretty quickly, and you'll use like killing edges and worm slayers, and that's really good. I have found that after the Western Isles, her offense is kind of a little bit too lacking sometimes, but I still think people give too little credit for her combat. It's not that much worse than her peers. She doubles more reliably than almost any of them, and a lot of other units have trouble one-round KOing. You have a couple units in FE6 that can one-round KO, Percival, Milady, Rutger mostly. Other than that, not a whole lot of people can one-round, and you know, you often have to combine enemies for kills, and Shanna can do that just fine. And her durability, you know, she has high avoid, she's going to dodge more often than not. You still have to keep her safe, you can't rely on avoid generally in FE6. It's kind of a good way to get her killed. She's not a great candidate for the Delphi shield. I usually have that on Milady instead, so she can like actually tank bow users. Shanna is probably still in danger if she has to tank a bunch of snipers or nomads, but it is an option for her if you wanted to. But that's when her combat is generally the worst, I find, relative to her peers. But the flyer utility is still so useful that I would still put Shanna pretty high. I think Shanna's still better than most FE6 units. I would not put her in S tier, don't get me wrong. Flying is super good. There's a lot of flying utility in FE6 in almost every chapter, and even if it's indoor chapters, it can still be good to have the ability to ignore pillars and just rescue drop stuff. But I don't think she's S tier. Her combat is underrated, but it's not fantastic, I will admit that. I think she's a better flyer than Fiora, for example. I think she's better than Fiora. It's hard to rate her higher than Zane, considering Zane has the ability to promote in Limb mode or promote early in Hector mode and still be like super good. The same goes for Lewin, that's kind of tricky. But roughly around this area, I think she's better than SOV Alm, probably. In fact, I might have overrated Alm. I'm in Act 3 right now of Shadows of Valencia, and Alm is looking like a lot worse. Soon he's going to look better again. But I think for now I kind of want to move Alm down like a couple spots because I actually don't think he's that good. Partially because I didn't train him, but even with like, if he had like 4 more level ups, which is like as much as it could possibly give him, I think, in all this time, I still think he wouldn't be that good. So I'm going to move him down a little bit. But I like Shanna in A tier. I think it's reasonable to say she's a top 10 unit in Binding Blade hard mode. And on normal mode, I think she's actually significantly better than this. I think she's actually one of the best units on normal mode, but I'm judging her based on hard mode here. Next is Sue, submitted by Alexis, and Sue is chill. I find a lot of people just compare Sue to Shin, and they're like, alright, Shin is better, so why use Sue? There is actually a good reason not to use both, and that's if you don't want to go Sakai route, but I actually think Sue is better than Shin on normal mode. I think on hard mode, Shin's hard mode bonuses are good enough to the point where his advantages overwhelm Sue's advantages, but it's important to remember that Sue has some of her own. The first one is she just joins earlier. Joins in chapter 6, doesn't have a weapon there to start it off, but if you put one on Roy or something, she can just get one off the bat and help out. So as far as I'm concerned, she's available for like half, maybe a little less of chapter 6. And then chapter 7, she's useful for shooting down wyverns and providing ranged chip. And rescue dropping in chapter 8 is super huge because that map is so large. And then the same kind of utility for all the next chapters, 8x. And then only in 9 does Shin join. And they have the same boys bow rank, if I remember correctly. They both have base D, so they can use steel bows. But that's important because there is a killer bow that comes somewhat early. I think the earliest one you get is from that village in chapter 9. And that's Killer Bow Village, so that's, if you visit that, you're going to B route, which is not something you might want. But either way, there are Killer Bows available for use. I think there's another one in the chest somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong. And Sue can probably use those. I keep wanting to say Shu because of Shin. Sue can probably use those, because getting from D to C doesn't take that much. It's like basically 25 rounds of combat if she's doubling it, or killing. One of those two things, it will be enough to give her 2 weapon XP per battle, regardless of weapon use. Every bow in FE6 gives 1 weapon XP. So if you give her the killer bow, she's pretty good at one-rounding things, because she'll have a pretty good shot at killing. Like basically, if you double with the killer weapon, you have like roughly 30 to 40% crit, which gives you roughly a 50-50 shot at killing in 1 round. And if you're not 1 round killing, you're still doing like significant amounts of damage. And I think the ability to use the killer bow kind of compensates for Shin's higher strength. And in fact, it makes her shine a little bit compared to other combat units you might have. So I think Sue is good for chip damage. And FE6 is a very player phase centric game where the enemies are kind of a threat, so you want to avoid counterattacks. And being able to do that using bows is a pretty big advantage in FE6. And Sue is one of the better bow users in that game. She's definitely better than the snipers in that game, or at least the archers. You could argue that a sniper like Klein is more useful because you don't have to train him. But Sue is pretty good. I'm not going to hold against her that she makes you go to Sakai if you don't use a Pegasus Knight. That is one more reason I like Shanna, by the way, is training her. Let you not go to Ilya, but if I'm not counting it against Sue, I also shouldn't be counting it in favor of Shanna, I guess, to be consistent. So maybe I shouldn't count it in her favor, but it is something to note in practice if you're playing. But for a tier list, I'm not sure if it's fair to count it. I guess it's also kind of annoying that if you use her, you probably don't want to use Shin, unless you're also using both Pegasus Knights, and you generally don't want to be using both Pegasus Knights. I think Tate is pretty bad, actually, or what's her other name? Thea, I think, is her localized name. I generally try to use Shanna and then maybe a Nomad if I want to. So I think that leaves Sue somewhere in the B tier. Not exactly sure where, but I think she's a decent unit, just one that needs a bit of hand-holding. Like, she's not exactly an enemy face tank or anything. She's alright, but she's not fantastic. But I would definitely recommend you use her at least once if you haven't done it yet. I really like her utility. Echidna's The mount is really good in the availability too, so I kind of want to put her over Echidna and some of these other earlier goons. Her ending up next to another Bone Knight is a coincidence, but I think it kind of fits here. Maybe higher than Aloe. Some people want Aloe to move down. I agree it looks a little bit odd here, but I think its durability and maddening is something that people haven't really experimented with much. He's one of the few units that can like survive a hit on maddening at base level. I think that's worth something here, right? But yeah, I think Sue is in an okay place here. I think he's pretty alright. Alright, next we have Noah, submitted by renowned, I need to like pronounce this properly, right? We got renowned hero Lawrence Hellman Gloucester, who submitted Sue, so thank you for that. Or not Sue, what's his face? Noah, there we go. Kind of a forgettable cavalier for a lot of people, but there are some things that need to be highlighted about him. He joins in Chapter 7, and I think first timers, they will almost always use Alan and Lance. Almost everyone recommends using Alan and Lance for people who are new, and even without any impressions from the outside, you will find people are more likely to use early game units. So they often don't want to use more people of the same class, and for that reason, Noah often gets put aside. And I mean, in this game, they're pretty right too, because Alan and Lance are better. But there are some contexts where Noah can be pretty good. I think the most notable thing about Noah is he has a C rank in swords at base. Alan and Lance, I believe they both have D or E in swords at base. They definitely don't have C. I forgot if their weapon ranks were like swapped, kind of like Cain and Abel or not. But the point is, C rank allows you to use killing edges. It allows you to use, blades, I guess. Mostly the killing edges is really nice to use. And if you promote, I think he gets like +1 rank as well. So he's closer to using something like a silver sword, or, well, you don't get the brave sword in FE6, but the point is he has more options when using swords. Wormslayer is not a really nice weapon for him to use. Noah also joins closer to level 10, so if you just want someone to promote with a Night Crest without having to invest heavily in them, like if you're doing a 0% growth run, then he's pretty useful. For Don, something like Noah is a lot more useful than Alan and Lance, even though Alan and Lance have a better support. But yeah, Noah's pretty nice for that. Other than that, I find his stats are kind of meh. They can be okay, I guess, but they're not exactly great. Kind of what you'd expect for a unit that joins in the mid game. He doesn't join as a unit that's as good as like a trained Alan or Lance. He's like what you'd expect him to be, a couple levels under leveled, I think. And in particular, I remember Don complaining a lot about his hit rates. His skill isn't exactly the greatest, and I believe neither is his luck, but I'd have to look that up. Generally, I think Noah's stats are okay. Definitely a usable unit. It's just it's just like one of those units that like, if you've gone through FE6 once, then maybe you'll be likely to want to use Noah just to try him out. But FE6 is such a large cast that there's like a lot of units like that. So it's easy to like forget about him, I find. But he's not bad. He's alright. He's alright. The Cavalier class is really good in FEGBA. I think he's worse than Echidna. That's like the point of reference I'm using here. I think he's around Chad's level, seems about right. I'm gonna put him right over here. I think he's better than Lou. The Cavalier class is too good to not put him over Lou, I think. Despite Lou's availability advantage, which is, to be fair, is only like 4 chapters. Next on the list, I have Guy from Fire Emblem 7, the Blazing Blade, submitted by Kieran. Ironically, Kieran is also on this tier list, but he didn't submit himself. Alright, understandable. And I've never liked Guy in FE7 as a unit once I've realized what's important and what isn't. The biggest part is FE7, unlike FE6, is very enemy phase focused, so things like 1-2 range is more important than, you know, having particularly high speed or high skill. If Guy was in FE6, he'd be about as good as Rutger is, assuming like similar availability. And similarly, if Rutger was in FE7, I'd rate him a lot worse than he is in FE6. So it's not just that Guy's stats are that much worse than Rutger's, they are quite a bit worse, but that's not the biggest factor. The biggest factor is, you know, the same things that make Joshua worse. Is just a lot of enemies that have 1-2 range in FE7, and it's a game where if you use a javelin or a hand axe, you have reasonably competent stats, you can just wipe out a whole field of enemies, and a lot of maps will reward that for doing that. In a map like Cog of Destiny, Guy's just not having an enemy phase, and there's not many spots where Guy's high skill and speed come in handy. Usually units have acceptable hit rates, so having a lot more hit rates than other people, having a lot more skill, having a lot more accuracy, not worth a whole lot. Similarly, a lot of enemies in FE7 are slow. You only need about 14 speed to double most enemies, maybe 15. So Guy, it doesn't really matter much whether you have 20 or 30 or just 14 speed. You're going to double most things anyway. And some units who are slow, like Hawkeye, still have the means to double faster enemies if they want to, like using a Brave Axe, or one-hit KOing with a Killer Axe crit, or maybe an effective weapon. And these are all ways to patch up the benefits or these are all ways to patch up having low speed, but for Gi there's no real way to patch up not having 1-2 range, or having weapon triangle disadvantage over all these lance users in this game. There's like the light brand, for example, but there's only one, only has 25 uses, and it just weakens you a lot. When you're using a light brand at range, it just doesn't do much. So yeah, there's not as many ways to fix the flaws that Gi has as the flaws that other units have to compare to Gi. That's the reason why Sword Masters and FE7 just don't really work out very well. There are benefits to using him in the early game. He's pretty nice to have around. He's one of the like 2 or 3 units that can use a killing edge, and he uses it by far the best because of his high speed. He doesn't even need to crit to like KO most of the time. He just 2-hit KOs most brigands with the killing edge, I believe. He gets weighed down a little bit, but his speed is so high he can weigh himself down a little bit. I've also seen him double with the Iron Blade sometimes, for example. So those are all like advantages to using Gi. He's helpful in the early game, but once you have to pick units and you get like the Linda's League back and everything, it's hard to find a deployment slot for him. And another thing that annoys me about using Gi is like similar to Su and Shin, and you know, the Pegasus Knights in FE6. He forces you on a worse route. Now this time the route split is only 1 chapter. It's Pale Flower of Darkness, and if you use more Hero Crest characters than Guiding Ring characters, you'll generally go to Jeremy route, and that's a worse map. It's just a really big slog to play compared to the Kenneth one. That is a reason I personally don't like using units like Gi, but I'm not going to hold it against him. I just thought I'd note it real quick. So I think Gi is definitely like a C or a D tier unit. I don't think he's good at all. He's not unusable. I find he generally doesn't help you as much as you would want to. I think he's worse than Joshua. I think there's more of a point in using units like Joshua and FE8, even though it's also very enemy phase centered. FE8, I find that there's still a couple more spots where Joshua is useful. It also helps that FE8 has triple weapon effectiveness, and Joshua can use something like mostly the Armor Slayer to bigger effectiveness than Gi can. Yeah, that's basically it though. That's the biggest difference between them. I would put Gi around here somewhere, kind of like Brighton and Lot, where he's most useful in the early game, but not a whole lot other than that. Okay, now we got Alexis's other submission, which is Priscilla, also from FE7. The only Troubadour / Valkyrie in the game, and that alone is like worth praising because it's a good class. Not because she's the only one, but just it's a good class to have. Both rescue drop utility and healing utility is nice, and it's not as good as like a Cavalier, for example, where they can use like both swords and lances, but everything else that's good about Cavalier is basically in that class. And you don't really have many other mounted units at that point in the game. You have like Marcus, who's usually very busy, and you have Lewin, and that's basically it. So having another one is really nice. And healing is just... what it means in FE7 is generally a unit doesn't have to use a vulnerate on themselves. They'll get healed for more HP by Priscilla doing it for them, and then they can use other things. They can do other things. So let's say Marcus just took on like 10 enemies at once, and now he's injured, and you kind of want him to like kill another enemy. You can have Priscilla heal him, and then he can attack someone else. And that's basically Priscilla giving Marcus another player phase. That's basically the usual healers in a game like FE7. Other than that, you can keep up with your mounted units and keep them healthy if you need to. Think of a chapter like chapter 17, Whereabouts Unknown, the Raven chapter. You'll usually have your cavalry rush ahead to try and secure Raven and the treasure. And that means foot units like Sarah often get left behind, but someone like Zane or Lewin or Kent or even Florina, they'll probably get injured if they're fighting a lot of enemies, but they kind of have to rush. So having Priscilla available to heal them is just super nice. So I think Priscilla is very useful. The staff utility in FE7 is not as good as it is in a game like FE5, where you just get like a free S tier basically, or free A tier, being able to use staves. FE7 is not a game where Warp, for example, is very good. But there are a couple chapters where having magic available is really nice. Think of Cog of Destiny or Genesis, if you can, use the actually use your things. Because Barrier is very useful sometimes in FE7. If you want to enemy phase a lot of enemy mages, getting +7 res without having to use a pure water is super nice. And also Restore is very useful occasionally in FE7. And you have viable physics, so leveling her up isn't all that hard. At first, the early game XP for healers in FE7 is pretty slow. 11 XP for heal and 12 for mend is atrociously slow. But once you're able to buy physics and buy torches, Priscilla can hit level 10 at least in fast playthroughs, and in slow playthroughs she probably can hit level 20 around the desert chapter basically. So yeah, pretty good. I would say she's like A tier, maybe B tier, probably A tier. Like the huge amount of availability, I think she's like on par with the 3 house units, if not better. Just the healing utility for most of the game is super nice. She's available and almost always one of your best options to deploy. Not a whole lot else to say about her. I'm gonna put her around here somewhere. I think Priscilla is really good. It's hard, like the things she does are like very plain and things that I've explained to death, like rescue dropping and healing. But that doesn't mean they're not good. It's just we're kind of accepting that we have this. But try playing without her and Sarah for a while and didn't realize just how essential healing is. Like there's not a whole lot of good passive healing or item-based healing in FE7. You have like no elixirs to work with, just vulneraries. They only heal 10. So Priscilla is super important in the early game, I find. And then Corey has submitted Pent, and as I said earlier, I would rate Pent really highly because really he's just really strong. I think anyone who has played FE7 and maybe got some kind of pre-promo bias, like stomped into them somehow, I think everyone made an exception for Pent. Maybe because he joined so late, or maybe just because he kicks all kinds of ass every time he appears. Like you see how good he is in the Desert chapter, and then he joins, and you're probably like, wow, I actually get to use this guy now, and he's still overpowered. 1-2 range that kills everything has always been good, and especially in an enemy phase based game like FE7 where the enemies don't pose much of a threat, but you still need to get rid of a lot of them. It's pretty nice to have this guy around. He has more durability than your average mage, partially because his own bases are so good, and partially because of the Louis support where he just gets +3 defense and +15 avoid. Actually only +7.5 avoid, because Louis is light, not some kind of avoid giving affinity. But still more durability than you can expect of a mage, and the ranks to make use of high level tomes if you want to, but most of the time it's just one-shot stuff or one-round stuff with thunder or fire or even L-fire if he has to. The wyverns in his joining chapter just die. Pretty much every generic enemy he faces just dies. E2 mages even. There's just no stopping Pent offensively. And he also has A-rank staves, so he can use the physic that he joins with. He can use Fortify when you get it. He can use Warp when you get it. Rescue, Hammer, and anything you want really. Restore is a very valuable one. Barrier is really nice. Those are only like C and D rank, but they're still very nice. Actually, they're both C, right? Whatever. The point is you can use them. The point is you can use them. He's gonna reach S rank Anima soon, so he's even gonna get some crit on top of that. He always doubles because he's so fast. Pent is just he's really good. It's like Don wrote like a rating utility once. Where he just basically wrote like, yeah, you kind of wish that he flew or that he had more availability or more move, but that's really all you can ask for. That's really all you can ask for. Pent is good from the moment he joins. It's just how much do we penalize him for his low availability, and I think I'd still wow, my voice is like cracking all over the place right now. It's probably because these take a long time to record, but we're almost done. I'm thinking like Dean level utility is pretty much fair to grant to him, like Dean, Quan level utility, maybe above the 3 house units. I think he stands out more than those. Maybe not more than some of these. It's kind of dicey. I'm gonna put him below the 3 houses units. I don't know. It's really difficult with these 3 houses people. I'm gonna put him up here for now. I think he stands out more than the 3 houses units, but you know, it's pretty tough to compete with some of these. I gotta admit. I think Pent is definitely way too good to put him any lower though. A lot of these like good but low availability units end up like a little lower than maybe they should have. But I think Pent deserves to be up here. Where is Salah again? Did I rate him yet? I could swear I did, but maybe I didn't yet. I think Salah is relatively better than Pent actually. And I'm pretty sure, yeah, oh, here he is. Okay, so actually, okay, since I rated Salah here, yeah, I think weirdly enough, Salah has worse stats, but I think his utility in FE8 is better. So either I need to move Pent down a little bit actually, or Salah up a little bit. Because I think Salah is better relatively speaking. Because in FE8, for example, Warp is more useful in that game. And I think Salah's offense stands out more. So maybe I just move Salah up a little bit. Yeah, I think they're close though. So I'm okay with this right now. I think this is more fair. Alright, next up we have Lucius, submitted by Darren. Thank you very much. Lucius is very strong, but he's also very glass cannon-y. I think a lot of people used to overrate the difference between Urk and Lucius. I made like a Pitfalls episode partially about the difference between them. Or actually it was like the Kanas waifu actually, where I talked about that. It's like Urk has higher might on his tomes and Lucius has a higher magic stat, and in the end it turns out they have roughly the same attacking values. I like Urk a lot more personally when it comes to attacking because he joins earlier, so he can also promote earlier. I think he's the better unit between the two. Lucius's main advantage to me is that he can promote into Bishop and get C staves, whereas Urk only gets E staves. By the time a high staff rank starts mattering, I think Urk can have the requisite staff level to basically do the same things that Lucius could, using things like Restore and Barrier and even Warp if you want him to. That is all an option. Takes a while, but with all of FE7's event maps, I don't think it's a big difference. But there is, you know, it's always an advantage to have a little more of an ability to use staffs upon promotion. Not everyone plays the same, so I'm not going to pretend like a +2 in staff rank is not a difference at all. But the fact that Lucius joins a lot more unleveled than Urk, for example, if you don't train him in limb mode at all, or you just don't play limb mode, then Urk joins at level 1 in chapter 14, whereas Lucius joins at level 3 in chapter 17, basically chapter 17X, because he joins at the end of it, since he's recruited so late in the chapter. So training him up from level 3 to level 10 to promote with the first Guiding Ring, that's going to take a lot of effort. I think it's like very hard to do, especially in Nectar Heart mode. So I think he's worse than Urk, but I don't think he's a tier worse. So I think he definitely goes around here somewhere. You could put him below Paddy or Muriel if you wanted to. But I'm just going to put him next to Urk because they are so similar attacking wise. I think Thunder is a lot better than Lightning. I think Thunder is also a lot better than Shine as a weapon. But in the end, they have roughly the same offense and they take roughly the same amount of hits. Even Lucius's lower luck is often brought up as something that like hurts Lucius's utility. But the Tactician affinity, or the Tactician's bonus that is usually given to you, gives some crit avoid as well. And as a result, Lucius also rarely gets crit. And if there's something that has like crit on him, it's usually like a Killing Edge, which would crit Urk too. Or it can be something like a Thunder Mage, which often doesn't even kill him because his res is so good. Depends on what time of the game we're talking about, of course. And then we have Kanaz, submitted by Stuart Graves, good old waifu Kanaz. I think he is better. I definitely think he's better now than Urk and Lucius. He joins at level, I believe this base level is 8, so much closer to promotion than either of these, and you don't have to give him XP in the meantime to get to that point. So it's his combat again is fairly similar. I do think he has some advantages. I believe his durability on average is a little bit better, and I've always said that like Flux is by far Kanaz's best tome. A lot of the Kanaz waifu is about how Flux is much more useful than tomes like Luna and Nosferatu. A lot of people praise Luna for its ability to, hit some of the bosses in the late game and have like really high res. But for most of the game, Luna is worse. It weighs him down a lot, and it has 0 might. Effectively, Luna's might compared to other tomes is the same as the enemy's res stat. If an enemy has 7 resistance, then Luna has 7 might. But most enemies have about 0, 1, maybe 2 resistance, so that basically makes Luna very weak. And because it's so heavy, it's also not going to double a lot of the time, whereas Flux will. Kanaz's speed is decent. It's not like overkill high like Geese is, so getting weight down can hurt him a lot. That is something that's like his biggest disadvantage compared to Urk or Lucius, is by the time they've been trained, when Kanaz joins, Kanaz is not going to double some things, but that difference is like very small, and when Kanaz promotes, I think he even surpasses Urk and Lucius on average on speed-wise, or at least he gets enough to double FE7 enemies, because they're so slow, and he gets like +4 AS from promoting, some because he doesn't get weighed down by Flux anymore, and then like +3 speed, just because FE7 is like, alright, here's some speed Kanaz, be good now. He's promoted Kanaz, especially Urk promoted Kanaz, is so nice to have. Still E-rank staffs, but he can get those up pretty easily, same way as Urk. Prioritizing him with dancing when you have nothing else to do, defend maps being around, purposely getting units injured when there's nothing to do, because FE7, a lot of the maps are just kind of like snooze maps, and you don't have anything better to do than raise Kanaz's staff rank in some of these, like the Vida map, for example. Or like, what's the map? Battle Before Dawn, for example. Another one of those maps where once you're kind of taking care of all the objectives, all you really have to do is, heal. That's really all there's to do. I'm much more elaborate on exactly how Kanaz works in the waifu, so what I just said is just like the things I come up with on the fly. But generally, Kanaz is like, alright, truth kill most enemy types because the enemy low res, enough speed to double, joins 2 levels from promotion. You can promote him later if you want to, but early promoting is good. And Luna is occasionally useful, Nosferatu is occasionally useful, but it's mostly about Flux. And for that reason, I'm going to put him over them, and probably over most of these units in the early game, honestly. I think he's like good all around for most of the game. I would put him like around here somewhere, I think. I think this is an okay spot for waifu Kanaz. Still in the same tier as these two. I generally find that I'm gonna actually scroll up here. I find that Kanaz is like much more convenient to use than Urk and Lucius, and in fact most units in FE7. It's really hard for me not to use Kanaz. Every time he joins, I'm like, all right, time to use Kanaz. Yay, I like this guy. He's a good guy. He's a good waifu. Alright, now Poison X has the last submissions. He actually submitted both Heath and Legault, so after I tier Heath, let me grab Legault real quick to tier as well. I somehow forgot him, I don't know how. But yeah, Heath is a flyer, a wyvern rider, joins in the middle of the game. I used to think that Heath was like really bad. Might surprise you, this is like very long ago, but my logic was as following, alright? So you got a lot of enemy types. You got swords guys, lance guys, axe guys, bow guys, and then you got magic guys. Magic guys, well, Wyvern Riders have low res, so he's bad against those. Bow guys, I mean, he's a flyer, he's weak to bow, so he's bad against those. So that's like 2 out of 5 types that he's not good against. Then there's the weapon triangle. I mean, he's basically bad against axes because weapon triangle, so that's like 3 out of 5 that he's bad against. So really he's only good against sword users and maybe lance users, and that was my reason why he was bad. And then I looked at like the enemy composition in like the chapters after he joins, and it is for a very large part archers and mages and some axe users. I was like, alright, Heath must be bad then. And it turns out Heath's stats are actually like really good when you train him, and there's a lot more to it than just, you know, weapon triangle and everything. And also the flaws that he have are easily coverable. For example, if Heath really needs to take on a bunch of mages, if he uses a pure water and he's been trained a bit, Heath survives just fine. He's I mean, he's not going to tank him forever. He's not great against Valkyries, but generic thunder mages, for example, not at base level, but once he's been trained, he's kind of fine against them when using a pure water. And his physical powers especially are like notable. As I said, his HP is really high, but his strength and defense are like really good when trained too. He's the only really durable flyer you have for quite a while in FE7. The Pegasus Knights are good. Flyer utility on them alone makes them great. Like, I got Fiora on A tier, even though it bothers me every time I look at it. I think Florina is pretty good as well. But Heath can do things that they cannot, and one of them is just running over there and doing combat against non-magic enemies. Like, he's much better than that. Again, once he's been trained. But I'll get into that. And his ability to take on like multiple enemies without dying is just a lot better. Now training him is a bit of a tough thing to do at first because he doesn't double. His speed is notably worse than the Pegasus Knights. Strength is like on par or better for sure, and so is his HP and defense, even at base level. But not doubling is annoying. But he's very flexible, kind of like with Shanna in FE6. If a unit can fly and they're not like completely worthless at offense, it's not that difficult to set up kills for them while keeping them safe. And FE7's next few maps actually make it easier than it looks to set up kills for Heath. The desert, most of the enemies have less mobility than he does, so it's pretty easy to single out enemies for him to kill. Crazed Beasts has a lot of the same enemies in the same places. He's actually like decent fighting cavaliers or pirates when using an Axe Reaver. I find it actually pretty effective to kill the bosses in Living Legend using the Axe Reaver. His hit rate is like decent. If he misses, he probably dies to a double attack, but you know, getting like 100 XP on him is super nice. It also makes it easier to get to Genesis, so I usually do it anyway. I mean, I'll just take the risk, fuck it. So that's pretty good. And what else does he do? I mean, mostly he just flies. He can rescue Hector even after promotion, I believe, because of the way the Mill 8 and Constitution formula works. Florina and Fiora cannot do that. They cannot rescue promoted Hector. Actually, I'm pretty sure Farinat cannot and Fiora cannot. I'm actually not entirely sure on Florina anymore, but the point is Heath can definitely do it because, you know, he has a lot more aid than they do because he gets +5 from being a male. Life is unfair sometimes. So that's super nice to have if you're trying to like rush through, say, one of the last maps, Victory or Death, for example. That's pretty good. And once he's been trained a little bit, like gotten some speed, he only needs like 2, 3, maybe 4 speed level ups, and then he can double pretty much everything. I think 2 to 3 level ups is enough in any promotion, and then he's able to double, and his attack is good. So I think that Heath belongs in like the upper B or lower A tier for sure. I got some other Wyverns here, so it could be fitting to put him with them. He's a pretty good. The training he needs is definitely a drawback. It's just not a huge one, and it's definitely worth the investment. I think he's a little bit worse than Dean because Dean doesn't need the training, and the same goes for Tanith and Scarlet, I suppose. So I'll put him like at the lower end of the A tier. I think he's great. Maybe Fiora should be lowered a little bit. Maybe he shouldn't be lower than Shanna, but I'll let the comment section fight that one out. Let me go grab Legault real quick. Alright, so here's Legault. The reason you couldn't see him is because he was invisible. He's a stealth guy. He's a ninja. He's you know, he's a cleaner. He knows not to be seen because he's not strong. But Poison X9 also submitted Legault, so gotta put him somewhere. Legault is a thief that joins in the middle of FE7. Basically, in Dragon Gate, when you recruit him, the chapter's basically over. Generally, that's the hardest part, getting to him in time before he escapes. And most people just replace Matthew with him, and it's fair enough because his stats are better. I tend to think of like thieves as like getting credit for all the treasure from there on out, divided by the amount of like thieves or options you have. And once Legault joins, you have access to both Matthew and chest keys, so He has like somewhere between half and a third of all the treasure utility from there on out. There are some stealable items, some pretty good ones too. There's a guiding ring in the desert, for example, that only he and Matthew can get for you, because you gotta steal it from one of the generic mages. Getting chests with him is pretty inconvenient. I think you can buy chest keys in FE7, so not super great to be a thief in that game, but it's still better than some others. And you can find treasure in the desert, I guess. You can also use the reset trick to find desert treasure. I personally try to do that, but you can use the thieves for them if you want. I just prefer other units because they have more move. Thieves only have 3 in the desert, unfortunately, in FE7. For fighting, he's actually okay. One thing I distinctly remember when playing FE7 negative growths is Legault at base level can use a Worm Slayer and one-run KO the enemies with Axe Reavers in Kingship Spot. I was pretty impressed by that. Legault's strength is kind of low, but not so bad that you can't use it. It's like on par with, for example, like Guy, I believe, or Trained Matthew. He gets heart mode bonuses, but I believe his heart mode bonuses to strength amounts to like 0.05 per level, and you get 5 levels from heart mode bonuses in FE7, so it's like he gets like plus a quarter of a point of strength for just from his heart mode bonuses, which is hilarious. And that's the stat he needs the most. Strength is the biggest issue. His durability is okay. His HP and defense are all like decent. His speed is really high, obviously, being a thief and having to steal stuff. If he's able to 2-hit KO an enemy, they're probably going to die, but a lot of enemy types will not die in 2 hits to him. Something like a mage probably will, but I remember him being able to like 2-hit KO archers. If he gets a killing edge, I guess he has like a reasonable chance of crit. Lack of promotion or lack of a good promotion really sucks in FE7. Assassin is like the worst promotion in FE7 ever. It gets like no strength, no move, and no speed either, I believe. It's horrendously bad, and it's so late too, and it's like an expensive promotion item, and you only get 1 for free. You have to buy others from a secret shop, like in the penultimate chapter of the game. It's like, goddamn, that's bad. So not a great combat unit. Overall, definitely gonna fall off after he joins, even if he wasn't that great to begin with. I will put Legault, I think like a C tier unit at best. It's not that he's bad, it's just, I mean, basically what I just explained. He's not great. He's not great. Better than Guy, probably, maybe. Very hard unit to rate considering how much of this unit is utility. Definitely worse than Julian and Volk at being a thief, but not so much worse. I want to put him lower. Maybe I should put him lower. Maybe he's more like Soth, but I feel like Soth is a lot worse. Like Legault's combat potential looks a lot more threatening compared to Soth's. I don't know if it's worth a tier difference or not. Maybe he should be below Guy, because Guy is the early game utility. Seems about fair. Alright, so that's the tier list. Let me scroll up and down real quick so you can see, you know, my progress here. This tier list is getting bigger and bigger, and I need to mention, like, after all the events that happened of late, I have a lot more Patreons now, and a lot more support has come my way, which I'm super grateful for. It is going to make it very difficult to make these tier list videos in a timely manner. They take more and more time every time I'm doing. I'm happy to do them, but they might come out at a little bit of a slower rate in the near future. Also because recording these is just generally pretty exhausting to do. I enjoy it, but it is pretty exhausting. But thank you guys so much for your support as always. If you're a new Patreon, I do ask you to be a little bit patient for the next thread. I've only done like, this has been half of the ones I'm supposed to do right now. I still have another half for units that are from Sacred Stones and onwards to do. And then only then am I gonna post a new thread for a new batch. So if you have to like unpledge after that, I completely understand. But I'm just super grateful for the support I've gotten. And this tier list will be complete one day, but it's gonna take me a while to figure out exactly how to do it because the video length is getting longer and longer. But I'm sure you guys enjoy it, otherwise you wouldn't be watching it. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out and goodbye. Only donate if you can afford it.